We often wondered, why must a story begin at the beginning? Why can it not start at the end? I have a reason, of course, for thinking this way. I like stories that end happily, and I'll confess to being one of those cowards who reads the last page of a book first just to make sure the story doesn't end in tragedy. Some people might argue that it's wrong to do that, but it's my way and nothing anyone says will convince me otherwise. So, right at the outset, for the benefit of readers like me, I'd like to mention that my story ends happily ever after, just the way I like it. There, I have begun my story at the end. The end was happy, but when and how did it really begin, and why did things happen the way they did? No one in my family seems particularly interested in discussing the whys and wherefores of anything. When I start to talk about it with my grandfather Abba, he just looks heavenward and says it was an act of God. If I question Daddy, he just smiles and holds Amy close. Mama doesn't say anything. Nishad, my younger brother, thinks I question too much. So I sit quietly by myself now and then, and I think. Was it an act of God? Was it coincidence? Sometimes I get the feeling that had Mama not been a doctor, nothing would have happened. Every so often I believe that it was all because of Nishad's soft heart and endearing ways. Or did events take shape after Daddy Mom came into our lives? There are other times, however, when I'm convinced that it was dear Govinda's old bamboo flute that changed our lives so completely that year. Nishad was only 7 then. Jay was 10. We lived in an old 3-bedroom apartment on the 5th floor of a building situated in the southern end of the city of Bombay, at Churchgate. It was just off Marine Drive, the Queen's Necklace, with its wide curving base stretching from Malabar Hill to Colaba. Our apartment was most quaintly designed and built sometime in the late 1980s. Mama said it was in the Art Deco style. There were no square or rectangular rooms. Each one was unique. Mama's bedroom had a little alcove with windows facing the bay where the sun set. Ours overlooked the east and had a balcony connecting with Mama's room. It was filled with my potted plants, which Abba had helped me to buy and raise. There were fragrant flowers like the jasmine or mogra, a gardenia and a frangipani. There were the useful plants, the new flute. CALLAIA, UNSLLNULLA, SOR, RADA, LLUA of curry leaves, chilies, mint and lemongrass. And the decorative croton, hibiscus ixora, as well as the tulsi or sacred basil. Abba, an avid gardener, familiarized me with all the plants and taught me all their Latin, English and Indian names. The 3rd bedroom was our music room and study, where we sat with Mama in the evenings, doing our homework, listening to music, watching television or just chatting. The sitting room, separated from the dining room by a large decorative arch, was hardly used except when we had company. And then there was the kitchen and Govinda's room with a bathroom adjoining it. On weekdays, at the stroke of 6, Govinda would quietly step into our bedroom balcony and play his flute. That was our alarm clock, the signal to jump out of bed and brush our teeth. I lays in bed for a minute or two, watching Nishad in the bathroom carefully brushing around the gaps in his teeth, checking to see if any more teeth were loose. The moment he had finished, he'd run to Mama's room to give her a hug and kiss, pick up his glass of milk from the dining table and rush out to sit on the little stool on the balcony to listen to Govinda's flute. How Nishad loved its sound. The 10 minutes that Govinda played each morning was never enough for him. As he began to play, he struggled out of bed, do the needful in the bathroom and joined them in the balcony, where I watched the eastern sky change to the new Flute N5. Early, rosy pink, with the sun getting ready to rise behind the tall Rajabai clock tower of the Bombay University. As I watered my beloved plants, the crows would begin their dreadful cawing and the pigeons and sparrows their incessant cooing and chirping. I liked the green parrots with their bright red beaks that occasionally came to perch on the plants or on the television antennae on the nearby terraces. I always wondered if the birds enjoyed Govinda's flute as much as we did. Once Govinda had finished playing, it was time to get dressed, have breakfast and go down to wait for the school bus. Mama and Govinda would stand in the doorway smiling while we waited for the lift to take us down. Darling old Govinda. So lovable, so gentle and kind and such a wonderful storyteller. In those days, Nishad thought he was a Pied Piper and that he was the best flautist in the world. Govinda used to tell us that he had learned to play the flute when he was just a little boy, growing up in his small village in the Konkan, south of Bombay, on the west coast of India. Govinda left his little home many, many years ago in search of a job. He had found work with Mama's parents, Aber and Gigi, helping with the household tasks. Mama told us that she and her two brothers had been young children then and had enjoyed his marvelous stories as much as we did. Govinda came to work with Mama and Papa after they got married and settled in the Churchgate 6Y apartment. My parents had met each other whilst studying in medical college. They had fallen in love and married soon after they became doctors. We were such a happy family until that sad day when Papa died suddenly of a tumor in the brain when I was almost 6. It was an awful time for all of us and I still hate thinking about it. We missed him so. Mama always says that Govinda was her pillar of strength during those terrible days after Papa's death and she could never imagine what we would have done without him. We loved Govinda's kindly face, wrinkled and lined with deep furrows around the mouth and on the forehead. Although dark-skinned, thin and short, he carried himself with a quiet dignity. I'll always remember his almost bald head, with a thin line of grey encircling it like a halo. His thick, white, bushy eyebrows, with some of the iron hairs drooping like tendrils over his dark and gleaming eyes, compensated for the lack of hair on his head. Dear Govinda was never quite sure of his age. When we asked him, he'd say it was between 65 and 75. When we teased him about this strange answer, he'd say that the actual age was not important. It was only the condition of the mind and body that mattered. Be that as it may, let me get back to my story. Nishad loved Govinda's flute. There was nothing to dispute the fact. He was simply enchanted by that old bamboo reed. The new flute _N7. May I play your flute, Govinda? He would often plead. No, no, my little one, the old man would shake his head. Your mother will tell you it's not hygienic. She's a doctor and she knows, so you cannot argue. Let's wash it with soap and hot water, Nishad would suggest. I don't think we can, Govinda would sigh and say. My poor flute is old like me. I'm sure it will crack with washing. One fine day when I was in a generous mood, I decided to buy Nishad his very own flute. One weekend soon thereafter, I went with Gigi, my grandmother, to the crowded Bhuleshwar Bazaar where she wanted to buy some embroidery threads. Oh, that wonderful profusion of colors and smells. There were hundreds of shops selling bangles and costume jewelry, shining brass and copper vessels, clothes and saris, flowers and garlands and toys of all kinds. My nose twitched at the pungent odor of fritters and samosas frying at roadside stalls. Sadly, such goodies have always been taboo for us because of the many disease-carrying flies that hover around and feed on the uncovered food. I remember watching the crowds that day and listening to the honking cars as their drivers fought their way through handcarts and pedestrians jostling each other. We were inside one of the shops buying Gigi's threads when I suddenly spotted a blind flute. I. At P. EHSPNY. A OA equals $a for Sati. Seller seated on the pavement across the road, with innumerable flutes spread out before him on a large red cloth. I pulled Gigi towards him when we came out of the shop. How I wished Govinda had been with us to help me select a flute. Choosing the right flute isn't the easiest task in the world, especially when you don't know a thing about the instrument. I told the flute the new flute _N9 seller that I wanted a flute for my 7-year-old brother. He picked out one which he said was first class best for a young boy. I did have to rely on his judgment, but I checked to make sure that the flute wasn't cracked. After I had parted with 5 rupees from my precious savings, the vendor lovingly packed the flute in a sheet of old newspaper and tied it with a green string. When Gigi dropped me home, I rushed into the study where Nishad was building a spaceship with his Lego set and dropped the package in his lap. What is it? He asked suspiciously, trying to feel the shape of the parcel. It's an early gift for your birthday, I announced. Now don't you ask me for another birthday present, 7. I suppose I should explain that nickname, 7. It was my special name for Nishad because his name really does mean the seventh note of the Indian musical scale. Nishad tore off the wrapping and pulled out the flute. His eyes were gleaming as he let out a loud whoop of joy. He actually gave me a smacking big kiss, something he's always been a little reluctant to do. Running his fingers gently down the straight and smooth length of the bamboo flute, he counted the tone holes, peered at the conical tapering at one end, and blew hard into it. There was a shrill sound like a train whistle, followed by an even louder shriek of excitement as he charged into the kitchen. Nishad Ca hugged Govinda so hard that the old man almost lost his balance. Look, just look what Maya's bought for me, Govinda. He cried. Come on right away and teach me to play it, said he, pulling him by the hand. Poor patient Govinda hastily dropped the potatoes he was peeling and hurried along after Nishad to our bedroom balcony. My little maestro, do you think you can learn to play the flute in just a few minutes? He asked. It will take you hours, days, months and years of learning and practice to master this instrument. Patience, my little one, above everything, you need patience. Nishad pulled Govinda down onto the floor, ready for his first flute lesson. In his excitement, he could hardly hold the flute in his trembling hands. Govinda gently but firmly placed Nishad's fingertips correctly on the tone holes. Now take a deep breath and blow gently, he instructed. Remember how you learned your A, B, C, D. You'll have to learn the musical scale before you can play any tunes. That's Sari Ga Ma Pa Dha in Indian music. Shadaj, Rishabh, Gandhar, Madhyam, Pancham, Dhravit and, of course, Nishad. That's the same as Do Re Mi Fa Sol La Ti in Western music, Govinda, I informed him. Isn't it marvelous that though Western and Indian music are so very different, the musical notes are the same? The new Flute 11. I stood in a corner of the balcony watching Nishad. As he concentrated on what Govinda was showing him, he pushed back strands of his thick mop of black hair which kept falling over his forehead. His big, dark brown eyes were watching with rapt attention. My eyes are black and my hair, which I was then planning to grow as long as Rapunzel's, is brown. I was plaiting it that day with the bright pink ribbons I had made Gigi buy for me in the Bhuleshwar Bazaar. Do you know, Nishad, that the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, Chinese and Indians played an instrument very similar to the one you've got long before Jesus was born? I asked. Not now, Maya, Nishad protested. Tell me about it later. Govinda showed more patience. I don't know about all these things you learn at school, baby, he said, but I do know that Lord Krishna played the bansuri many hundreds of years ago when he was a young boy. He led the cows out to the pasture and played the flute, and all the milkmaids of Gokul, the village he lived in, were enchanted with his music. They'd stop all their housework to go and listen to his flute, and the mothers-in-law would scold them for neglecting the housework. All the birds and animals of the forests near Gokul also gathered around to listen to his magical music. Will I be able to play as well as Krishna did one day? Nishad asked eagerly. Why not, my little one? Govinda smiled, but you'll have to play for many, many years before you become an expert. Are you the best flautist in the world, Govinda? My brother asked. Govinda looked flattered but amused. No, not in the least, he said smiling. I'm a poor old amateur who plays to keep himself happy. The best players are the great masters like Nalal Ghosh, who passed away some years ago, and T.R. Mahalingam, Rabindranath Sharma, Hariprasad Chaurasia and Vijay Raghav Rao. You've heard their music so many times on your mama's record player. I can't play even 1% as well as they do, he declared modestly. You've heard Herbie Mann's flute on cassette, Govinda, I remarked. He plays well too, don't you think? Yes, he does sound nice, Govinda admitted almost reluctantly, but I don't understand all this guess business which your father was so fond of. He blushed as both Nishad and I burst out laughing. It's not guess, Govinda, Nishad told him, it's jazz. Govinda just smiled. Stop teasing an old man like me, he said. The monster. Ishad took almost a couple of weeks to pick up the scales correctly on his flute. Mama and Govinda looked at him with so much pride in their eyes. As far as I was concerned, it was the worst fortnight of my whole life. It was sheer torment to hear the scales being played off key, sometimes as many as 27 times in a row. There were moments during those days when I felt like screaming. I wanted to break Seven's flute. I couldn't get away from the shrill, screechy sounds, even with our bedroom door closed. But I controlled my feelings. After all, he was younger and PD always felt protective towards him in spite of our quarrels. I must admit though, that he looked so serious and sweet trying to play that flute. I knew that I had to keep quiet. Fortunately for all of us, with each day that went by, he got better and better, the tone mellowed and 14. Life gradually became bearable again. Of course, PD get irritated at bedtime when Seven preferred learning the flute to listening to one of Govinda's wonderful stories. I had to put my foot down. Once Seven had got the scales right, Govinda started to teach him a folk tune. It made a peaceful change from the cacophony we had been subjected to for what seemed like eternity. Nishad, of course, was over-enthusiastic. "Can you teach me a raga after this?" he asked Govinda. "No, my little Baba," Govinda told him, regretfully shaking his head. "I've never studied Indian classical music. I can only teach you the folk tunes that I know and perhaps some bhajans. Ask your mother to sing you some of the ragas she learned when she was young. She has such a lovely voice." Mama blushed. "You know I haven't sung for years, Govinda," she said. "I'm quite out of practice. I could ask Jaspal though. He works with a recording company and knows so many musicians. He should be able to recommend a good teacher for Nishad." Mama had taken singing lessons when she was a little girl. Her entire family loved classical music. I remember how Gigi used to take us to musical performances, especially on Saturday evenings when we had no school the next day. Nishad and I often fell asleep at these all-night recitals, but Gigi insisted, and still does, that music can penetrate the mind even when you're asleep. Now, that's hard to believe, but I've found that it's true. The Monster 15. ABBA gave Nishad a cassette of Ravindranath Sharma's latest flute recording for his 8th birthday. Although I'd already given him the flute as an advance present, I bought him a slab of chocolate and a big bag of marbles. Mama, as usual, bought him lots of books, new clothes, shoes and a brand new pair of roller skates. I should mention something about our daily routine in those days. During weekdays, we had school till 2 o'clock. When we came home, we'd have lunch, do our homework and then visit friends or go to the nearby park where Nishad loved playing cricket. I enjoyed playing marbles with some boys who lived in the neighborhood. I beat them often, but the awful boys cheated sometimes. When we returned home from the park, it was time for a bath and dinner. Before going to bed, we'd watch TV or listen to music and, of course, there were bedtime stories told by Mama or Govinda. Sometimes, instead of going to the park, we'd accompany Mama to her clinic in Girgaon. Although she had a full-time job as a medical officer in a pharmaceutical company, Mama ran a clinic on Monday and Thursday evenings from 5 to 7. One of Papa's friends had given her 2 rooms in an old building in the crowded locality of Girgaon, where she charged patients only what they could afford. Seven and I enjoyed our trips to Girgaon. Sometimes we took our books along, at other times we chatted or played with some of the children who lived in the old building. I.e., the first time Nishad took along his flute to the clinic was a warm day in late March. He wanted to practice the tune that Govinda had taught him over the weekend. We climbed the creaking wooden stairs to the first floor of Shankar House, which was nearly 100 years old and badly in need of urgent repairs and a new coat of paint. A veranda, about 4 feet wide, with protective wrought iron railings, ran along the side of the building overlooking the main Girgaon road. There was a row of common baths and toilets at the landing on each floor. Down the length of the corridor, a series of doors, each painted with a different bright color, led into 1 and 2 room flats, each of which had a tap and washing place. Mama's clinic was at the center of that long corridor close to the staircase. Her clinic door, I remember, was the only one painted in an antiseptic shade of white. On that particular day, Mama went straight into her clinic. Seven and I stood near the balcony railing, watching the bustle on the street below. There always seemed to be hundreds of people down there. On the crowded pavement, street vendors sold their many wares, fruits and vegetables, garlands of flowers, lottery tickets and cheap, ready-made garments. I enjoyed watching the old lady who always stood near the temple at the corner of the street next to her skinny cow and a basket filled with grass. Many Hindus would drop a coin in her basket to pay for an extra mouthful of grass for the animal. The monster underscore 17. 7 was about to play his flute, but before he settled down I asked him to go to the other end of the veranda so that his music wouldn't disturb me. With my history book in hand, I watched him walk to the end of the corridor and lift the flute to his mouth. Opened the book to the page I had marked, and began to read. Suddenly, I heard Nishad call my name. He sounded most agitated. I glanced up and was astonished to see him charging back towards me. He looked really frightened. "There's monster in there," he said breathlessly, wiping beads of perspiration from his forehead with his shirt sleeve. "What happened? What monster? What nonsense are you talking?" I asked. "Didn't you? AOSRPRAIA hear him? Come with a pay SUA equals me quickly," he Peza beat Hamen excitedly, pulling me by AAFLL the hand. He led me to equals the end of the corridor, equals Ginning stopped before the last equals he ERDEGY door and said, "There. 3 IAA, that's just AAT Debo less than door, stupid," I said AA Peza scornfully. "It's painted 3 sa greater than less than green, with a 10 feet on it. Plus AS really, 7, what are EGHGE you talking about? Plus A. SSIGQ18A. Nishad looked confused. "Wait, Maya," he whispered. He put his flute to his lips and let a few notes tremble out. No. Get out," roared a deep, thundering voice from behind the closed door. We both bolted back to the clinic, watched by one of the tenants on that floor. "You're right, 7, I admitted. This monster's voice is even louder than Mr. Gomez, our geography teacher. Mr. Gomez sounds like a mouse compared to this one." "Let's tell Mama," said Nishad. "I don't think we should," I said. "She screams for Govinda when she sees a cockroach. What's the point of scaring her? Who knows, she might even faint." We sat quietly in Mama's clinic, waiting for her to finish with the patients. I peeked out once or twice to see if anything or anybody came out of that green door, but no monster appeared. "Anything the matter?" asked Mama on the journey home. "You're both so unbelievably quiet." "We're just tired, Mum," I answered. Dinner was quiet too. Govinda didn't come in to tell us a story that night since he had a lot of work to do. Mama came in to kiss us good night. She switched off the overhead light and closed our bedroom door. I looked towards Nishad. His eyes were open. I jumped the monster 19. Off my bed and went to his. "Do you suppose that monster looks like Dracula, who sucks people's blood with his fangs?" 7. I whispered. "I don't know, Maya. Do you think he eats children?" "I don't think so," I said. "There are quite a few children at Shankar house. Maybe he's like Kumbhakarna, Ravana's brother, whose body was like a mountain, whose breath was like a whirlwind, and whose voice sounded like thunder." That's the story Govinda told us some days ago, Nishad remembered. He's the demon who slept for 6 months and then woke up for a day to eat enough to last him for his next 6 months' sleep. Just like a hibernating bear. Maybe he looks like one. Maybe he looks quite ordinary, Nishad, I said, thinking hard. After all, Mr. Gomez has an equally loud voice, but looks quite normal. I wasn't really sure. "Let's try to find out what he looks like," suggested Nishad, cupping his chin with his palms. "Some of the tenants at Shankar house must have seen him. Let's try asking them the next time we go with Mama," I said. But during that particular weekend, we forgot all about the monster. My grandmother, Gigi, had a surprise birthday party for Abba, and in all that excitement we didn't think about anything else. Nishad played a little tune for Abba on his flute, and was he thrilled. I'm sure he had visions of 7 becoming the future flute maestro of India. I heard Mama reminding him about music lessons for Nishad. When Mummy got ready the following Thursday to go to the clinic, Nishad and I suddenly remembered the monster again. We went with her, and as soon as she went into her rooms, we decided to ask a few questions. An old lady lived in the room next to the clinic. We saw her seated on the ground, flapping a wicker winnowing tray to clean the chaff from a pile of wheat. I sat down beside her, stepping through the husk lying all round her. Would you happen to know that person who stays in room 10? I asked her. What's that? I can't hear you. Speak a little louder, little girl, she said, gesturing to me to come closer. I repeated my question very loudly. No need to shout, dear, she said, I'm not deaf, you know. She stopped flapping her tray and looked at me, a little puzzled. Why do you want to know about him? She asked. Leave him alone, he's a strange one. A couple of doors away, two boys that we knew were busy playing a game of Ludo. They must have heard me talking to the old lady. One of them suddenly said, the monster 21. He's a crazy man. Sometimes, he sits gazing into space for hours on end. We watched him. What does he look like? Nishad asked him. Quite mad, of course, the boy said. I glanced down the corridor. Almost at the end, I saw a man sprawled out on a folding canvas chair, with his feet stretched out before him. Let's ask him, I said to Nishad, pulling him by the hand. The brass nameplate on the door behind the reclining man read PK. Mehta, B.A. Mr. Mehta was busy preparing a pan. He was expertly using a cutter to slice delicate, thin strips of a supari onto the palm of his left hand. He glanced up at us as we watched him pull out two fresh, green beetle leaves from some secret pocket of his waistcoat. Aren't you the lady doctor's children? He asked. I nodded. May we ask you something, please? Just a minute, he said, applying a bit of slaked lime to the leaves. This pan was still not ready. He piled some more exotic ingredients onto the leaves, folded them, tucked the pan into a corner of his mouth, chewed contentedly for a few moments and finally said, Your mother's a good doctor, cured me of a bad cough last month. Now, what do you want to know? Who lives in room 10? Nishad asked hesitantly. 22Z. Oh, that fellow, he's a wild one, said Mr. Mehta. No manners at all. I've tried so often to talk to him, but he just ignores me. Mr. Mehta paused to chew his pan for a while. He sits behind that closed door, and I can't imagine what he does for a living. He doesn't go out at all, and all his food is brought up to his room by that little Ramesh who works in the restaurant downstairs. He's quite peculiar, and all of us have learned to keep away from him. I'd advise you both to do the same, he said, looking sternly at us. He folded his chair, waved to us, entered his room and shut the door behind him. The corridor was now quite deserted. Nishad and I quietly walked towards the end to room 10. As we stood before the door, Nishad whispered to me, Look, Maya, the door's slightly open, shall I peep in? Careful, Nishad, I said, if he's really mad, he might beat us, he might even kill us. It's dark in there, Maya, Nishad whispered, with one eye trying to peer through the crack. Suddenly there was the sound of a deep moan. We raced back full speed to the clinic and almost bumped into the postman who was coming out. I apologized to him, picking up the letters that had fallen from his hands. As I handed them back, I asked him, Do you ever have letters for room 10? Never, he said firmly. In the year that he's been there, never have I given him a letter or a package. The monster 23. Mummy came out of her clinic just then, her work finished for the day. What's the matter? She asked. Before I could stop him, Nishad pointed to the last door and blurted out, Does a monster really live in room 10, Mama? Do you mean Mr. Nath? Asked Mummy, looking quite puzzled. How do you know his name? I was quite taken aback. I've treated him a couple of times when he's been ill. Then you've seen him from very close, Mama. What does he look like? I could hardly contain my excitement. Mama looked rather puzzled. Like any other man, darling, she smiled and said, He's got 2 eyes, a nose and a mouth. But, Mama, Mr. Mehta who lives in room 8 told us he's wild. Said Nishad. Mama laughed. He could have said that because of his long hair, beard, mustache and the scars. What scars? Jay interrupted. They looked like burn scars to me. How did he get burnt? Nishad asked. Would it have been polite for me to ask him? Mama counter-questioned. It wouldn't have mattered in his case, Mama, I said. Mr. Mehta says he has no manners, and then look at the way he shouted at Nishad. That last remark slipped out accidentally. You children must have disturbed him if he shouted at you, said Mama. Perhaps he was taking a nap. I don't think he's mannerless at all. He was very polite to me and he sounded like an educated and cultured man. She looked at us curiously. Why this sudden interest in Mr. Nath? She asked. Nothing really, Mama, I told her. That night after dinner, Govinda told us the fascinating story of Lord Krishna's battle with Kaliya the snake demon. It ended with Krishna finally subduing him and dancing on his many heads. A few minutes after Govinda left the room, I remarked aloud, don't you wonder what that demon in Shankar house looks like? 7. Of course, I do, said Nishad, but how will we get to see him? Should we just knock on his door the next time we go to Girgaon? If he's as unfriendly as they say, he won't open the door, I'm sure, I commented. I scratched the top of my head for a while in Theminster N25. Had a brainwave. You could bark like a savage dog outside his room, and I'd shout for help and he'd run out to rescue me, I said. Why don't I roar like a lion instead? Nishad said with great enthusiasm. I laughed. No, I don't think it would work after all. He might get so scared, he'd double lock his door. I had another brilliant idea. I know what. Let's raise an alarm for fire near his room. Since Mama says he's already got burn scars, he must be terrified of fire and he'd charge out. 7 didn't like my idea at all. That wouldn't be fair, Maya, he said disapprovingly. We'd frighten all the other tenants as well. And just supposing Mr. Nath did run out, he'd see there was no fire and he'd do something terrible to us. Let's not upset him or make him angry, Maya, just supposing he's a criminal in hiding or an escaped convict or something like that. PD hate to be caught by him if he got angry. I was listening to him very intently. I slapped him on the back, not too hard of course, and shrieked, you hit the nail on the head, dearest brother. What are you talking about? He asked. I was very excited. Think you are absolutely right, Nishad, he must be a criminal in hiding. That's why he doesn't go out and doesn't meet or talk to anyone. He must be afraid of being recognized. And XJF, that's why all the people in Shankar house seem a little scared of him. Oh my clever brother, just imagine if we catch him and hand him over to the police, they'll reward us. What an exciting adventure it would be, and think how famous we'll become with everyone crowding around to get our autographs. Nishad looked stunned as he gazed at me with his mouth half open. Don't be absurd, Maya, your imagination really runs wild sometimes, he said. Don't you dare call me absurd, you rude fellow, I scolded. I'll bash you up if you talk to me like that, I'm older and bigger than you. When I had calmed down, I smiled and told him, just wait, Nishad, one of these days we'll see a photograph in the papers with big headlines. Brave children bait bad bandit. Nishad didn't answer. He was already asleep. Needless to mention that my dreams that night were full of robbers and cops and a brave hero. As expert detectives. MMA didn't really want to take us to the clinic that sultry, hot day in May, but we insisted. Our summer holidays had begun in April, and since we weren't going anywhere that year, we were just a wee bit bored. The bus ride to Girgaon was lovely. Strangely, although the heat and humidity are unbearable in the month of May, Bombay is so beautiful with all the trees in full bloom. The gulmohar with its bright orange and red flowers, the pink or purple jarul or queen's flower blooms, the pink cassia, yellow laburnum, purple jacaranda flowers, all strikingly heralding the coming monsoon season. They add so much vigor and color to the city, which looks drab, dry and dusty just before the rains. 7 took his flute along but didn't get a chance to practice because I suggested a game of marbles as soon as we reached Shankar house. You know that Mama doesn't really approve of your playing marbles, Maya, he told me as took out the marbles from the pockets of my dress. It's a boys' game and you're not supposed to play. Yes, grandfather, I said mockingly, but I can beat all the boys in school. What do you have to say about that? So what? He said. Anyway, I'm not playing. You won all my marbles last time. I'd rather play my flute. Just then, one of the marbles slipped out of my fingers and rolled down the slope of the corridor. My favorite one. I shrieked as I chased it all the way and saw it come to rest right in front of the door to Mr. Nat's room. I noticed that the door was slightly ajar. Without another thought, I quickly kicked the marble through the gap and into the room and rapped loudly on the door. 7, who had seen what was happening, ran down to stand beside me. We waited anxiously, but there was no reply. Nishad tried to pull my hand away as I knocked loudly again and called out, "Anybody in? May I come in? He may not be at home, Maya." Nishad whispered. I put a finger on my lips, signaling him to keep quiet. Then, I gently pushed the door open and walked into the room. It was dark inside. Nishad was by my side. As my eyes got accustomed to the darkness, I noticed an armchair below the closed window. On the floor next to it was an old metal trunk. I looked to the detective's 29. Other side. A simple wooden bed was placed against the wall. I was startled to see a sleeping figure on the bed with its back turned towards us. A table fan whirred quietly on a small table beside the bed. I built up courage. "Excuse me," I said boldly, but the figure on the bed did not. "Mr. Nath," Nishad called out gently. The man didn't stir. "Are you asleep?" What a foolish question. There was still no movement. "Are you ill?" I began to get a little worried by the silence. "Are you dead?" My voice trembled. "No," said the man, suddenly sate. Jumping up. Nishad and I ox ZSSG equals. FEF retreated a couple of BRB steps as he glared at us and we stared at greater than him. Since he was now facing the light from outside, we could see him quite clearly. He was much taller than Siddhar Aber or Govinda and A Benji Y also thinner. Dark M hair covered his face and the nose looked white. PSECUILLD IEAEAIN Trinda Amsal RRNN prominent emerging from that forest. Large, dark eyes stared at us silently with a puzzled expression. He was dressed in clean, white pajamas and a white shirt. His hands hung loosely from the sleeves. They looked quite powerful but had slender, long fingers. His deep, resonant voice suddenly broke the long silence. "What do you want?" "PVE lost my marble, *, I stammered. "Oh," he said, rubbing his beard with the right hand. "It's her favorite one, Mr. Nath," Nishad's voice squeaked. "The red one with pink and orange whorls." He said. "May I look for it, please?" "It rolled into your room," I said. There was another hum. I quickly looked for the marble, found it under the armchair and thanked him, ready to leave the room. As we turned to go, he said suddenly, "Just a moment." We turned around and looked at her. "How do you know my name?" he asked. "Mama told us," said Nishad. "She knows you. She's Dr. Suma Pandit," I explained. "She treated you when you were ill." "Detectives 31. I see," he commented, looking at me. He gazed down, looked up at me again and said, "Girls don't usually play marbles, do they?" "That's what Mama keeps telling her, Mr. Nath," said Nishad. X. "He doesn't look anything like a monster, Maya," said 7 as we walked back towards the clinic. "But did you see how thin he is? Maybe he's very poor and can't afford to eat." "He can't be poor if he's a crook on the run," I told him. "He's probably got millions of rupees stashed away somewhere in that room." "Do you really think he's a criminal, Maya?" "He doesn't look like one." Nishad looked doubtful. "Of course he's one, 7, I said, and he certainly isn't starving. Mr. Mehta told us that Ramesh brings his meals up from the restaurant downstairs." "But Maya, Mr. Mehta told us he doesn't work anywhere, so how can he possibly have money to pay for food?" Nishad said. "Exactly," I exclaimed. "He must have lots of money hidden somewhere, maybe in that trunk in his room. It's probably full of silver and gold and jewels. What rubbish, Nishad interrupted. I know I'm right, stupid, I told him. By the way, Seven, did you see his scars? I couldn't. It was too NF dark, but I bet he got them during a shootout with the police or something. Mummy told us quite clearly they were burn scars, Nishad said firmly. Perhaps the police had to set his house on fire to force him out, I suggested. Seven looked unsure. We didn't go to Girgaon during the next week. Nishad was learning to play Happy Birthday as a surprise for Mama, and the only time he could practice was when she was away at her clinic. I heard the tune so many times that I found myself humming it on several occasions. Govinda patiently listened to Nishad's efforts, conducting his performance with a wooden rolling pin. You got the ga wrong this time, Nishad Baba, he'd say. Now try it again. Occasionally, he'd tell him, you'll never be a good musician if you just play the notes. Little one, play with this and this, he'd say, pointing to Nishad's heart and head. Even, Happy Birthday must be played with soul and feeling. Mama was of course quite thrilled with her darling young flautist's performance on her birthday. She proudly told everyone who came to wish her about how well he played. In the evening, the whole family came to dinner. Aber and Gigi gave her a beautiful sari, her brothers gave her some books and perfume, and Nishad and I some lovely embroidered hankies. As usual, there were lots of chocolates for us and we had Detectives 33. A wonderful evening. On the Monday following Mama's birthday, Seven went alone with her to the clinic at Girgaon as I was spending the evening with a school friend. When they returned, Nishad told me he'd been to see Mr. Nath and I felt most annoyed that I hadn't been there. Seven had been quite upset about Mr. Nath's gaunt appearance and was sure that he was starving. He told me that he had knocked loudly on Mr. Nath's door that evening and said, "Open the door quickly, Mr. Nath." The man had opened it and asked him, "Lost another marble?" He had obviously recognized my brother. No, said Nishad. He had taken the man's hand in his own and thrust a bar of chocolate into it. Did you get a chance to peek into the trunk, Seven? I asked. Nishad looked disappointed. He didn't even ask me in, he said. Then he smiled. But I did find out something, Maya. I went down to the restaurant where Ramesh works and talked to him. Good for you, Mr. Detective, I said, patting him on the back. I hope you questioned him properly. Seven looked pleased. Ramesh told me that he takes 2 meals for Mr. Nath every morning and evening, and 2 cups of tea, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. Ramesh says he's not very particular about what he eats, it's always the same food, 2 chapatis, some dal and a vegetable. Mr. Nath pays cash and tips well. Ramesh told me something very strange, Maya, Seven added. Almost every Sunday, he carries 2 lunches to Mr. Nath's room and the same man is with him each time. He's tall, fair, stout and wears spectacles. Ramesh says his visitor talks a lot, unlike Mr. Nath who hardly speaks. Well done, Nishad, I told him. Now that we've made some progress with our inquiries, we'll have to sort out all the facts like expert detectives so that we can trap the crook. How you do go on, Maya, Seven sighed. How can you possibly, you Joe? Imagine he's a crook. He looks so ordinary. Criminals can look quite ordinary, smarty, I retorted. Did you see the picture of the Hyderabadi housebreaker in the papers yesterday? He looked like any man on the Dede Ma, a street. Nishad looked BWY asterisk doubtful. So it's SF greater than SSAS, OSA equals D or RFREMNA. ZRS Detectives 35. The monsoons broke the next day. Dark clouds accompanied by blinding flashes of lightning and roaring rolls of thunder burst with all their fury, flooding the streets with a heavy downpour. School was to have reopened after the summer holidays, but no traffic could move through the flooded roads and there was an unexpected holiday. I thought I'd spend the time usefully. I sat at my desk in our bedroom with a sheet of paper before me. I wrote in large block letters, catching a crook expert detectives, Nishad and Maya Pandit by appointment to the whole world. Then I began writing. About half an hour later, I turned towards Seven who was lying on his tummy, chin cupped in his palms, reading comics. Want to hear what I've written? I asked. He looked up questioningly. I've listed all the facts we know about Mr. Nath which might help us to trap him, I said. Want to hear? Seven nodded. Fact number one, I read, his name is Mr. Nath. We must discover his first name. Do you think that's his real name, Maya? Nishad asked. Probably not, I said. Most crooks have an alias. I added a big question mark after Nath. Fact number two, I read on, the tenants at Shankar House say he's mad, strange and unfriendly. Number three, he doesn't talk to anyone and is mannerless. But he did talk to us, Maya, and Mama says he's very polite, Nishad interrupted. He only talked to us because he had to, I said, and since he was under Mama's medical treatment, he had to be polite. Fact number four, he doesn't receive any letters. Seven nodded. Number five, he's been living in room 10 of Shankar House for more than a year, I continued. 6. He doesn't work and sits in his room all day. 7. The kids in Shankar House and even some of the grown-ups are scared of him. 8. He has no visitors except for a spectacled, fair, fat man who visits him on Sundays for lunch. 9. Food and tea are taken to his room by Ramesh from the restaurant downstairs. He doesn't care what he eats, pays his bill immediately and tips well. That ends my list. Have I forgotten anything? 7. Nishad had obviously not been paying too much attention to my list of facts. All he could say was, poor man, Maya, he must be so lonely if he doesn't have any friends. How can a crook have friends, idiot? I almost shouted. Expert detectives Y37. At least he has one friend, the one who meets him on Sundays, said Nishad. A brilliant thought occurred to me just then. That man must be Mr. Nath's accomplice in crime, I said. Maybe he keeps all the loot and he comes now and then to give part of it to his partner, Mr. Nath, for expenses. That's it. I'm sure I'm right. If you insist on calling him a criminal, I don't think I want to discuss anything with you, Maya, said Nishad angrily. He can't be such a bad man if he gives Ramesh such generous tips. Ramesh probably knows something about his past, so Mr. Nath must be bribing him to keep quiet, I said. Nishad glared at me with his arms tightly crossed across his chest. I was beginning to get fed up with him. How can we make any progress with our investigations if you take that attitude? 7. I asked. Tell cooperate only if you give up this idea about him being an escaped crook, said 7. You really make me angry. I almost hit him. I make you angry, you stupid oaf, I shouted. You make me mad. What is the point of all these inquiries if he's not a crook? If you think he's a nobody, what's the idea of bothering about him? Please tell me. Nishad looked thoughtful. I'd like to find out why he's so thin and why he's so lonely. I want to know why he doesn't have any friends and lives alone. CS, try to understand. 7. I told him, if he's lived in Shankar House for a year and hasn't made a single friend, there's something wrong. He's obviously scared that someone will recognize him and give him up to the cops. Maybe no one's tried to make friends with him, Nishad protested. Why should anyone bother? You've seen what a nasty bear he is, I said. I don't care, said Nishad stubbornly. I like him and I'm going to try and be his friend. Friends with a crook? Huh. You're crazy, 7, I said. The cops will take you to jail with him. Do you want that to happen, you idiot? Nishad merely glared at me and quietly walked out of the room. My theory seemed to have made no impression on him at all. Making friends with a crook. Foolish brother was determined to befriend the crook. He went alone to the clinic with Mama a couple of weeks later. Sadly, I couldn't go. I had to finish the awful task of writing 100 lines of I will not yawn in the class set by our history teacher. It wasn't fair, I grumbled to myself. Everyone in this world cannot be expected to like a dull subject like history. When Mama and Nishad returned in the evening, I noticed that he was rather quiet and his mouth was drooping at the corners. What's the matter, 7? I asked him, putting my arm affectionately around his thin shoulder. I went to his room because I wanted to make friends with him, Maya, Nishad said almost in a whisper. I took a deep breath to give me enough courage to knock. And then Jay heard an odd sound from the room. I put my ear to the door and do you know is what I heard? Someone was crying and one no it was Mr. Nath. I did want to go in to comfort him but I changed my mind. I hate anyone to see me crying, maybe he feels the same. Why do you think he was crying, Maya? He's probably worried and scared that the police are going to catch him soon, I told him. No, Maya, I know you're wrong, he protested. Alright then, maybe he was sobbing because he's feeling sorry about the crimes he's committing. In that case, he really should give himself up to the police right away. I hate you, Maya, Nishad said angrily, running out of the room. You talk such rubbish sometimes. I quietly followed him. I knew I had upset him with my theories again. I peeped into Mama's room. He wasn't there. She was busy on the phone talking to Gigi. I knew the conversation, as usual, would go on forever. I tiptoed to the kitchen and there he was, the little baby, sitting on Govinda's lap, with his arms around the old man and his little head resting on Govinda's shoulder. What's upset you, my little one? Asked Govinda, rocking himself back and forth as he held Nishad close. Why do people cry, Govinda? Nishad asked, his eyes looking just like a cocker spaniel's. Why do you cry, Govinda? The old man asked. Making friends with a crook 41. I cry when I hurt myself after a fall, but that's only sometimes, said 7. And you cry when I beat you up, I said. 7 suddenly noticed my presence in the kitchen. Don't listen to her, Govinda, she's mad, he said. She thinks she knows everything about everything. She's a crybaby herself, she locks herself in the bathroom and sobs every time she gets scolded by you or Mama. But then she's only a girl and girls cry for no rhyme or reason, they're idiotic. Rubbish, I said indignantly with my hands on my hips. Nishad ignored my remarks. Grown-ups have everything in the world, they can do what they like, buy what they like, go where they please, why would they cry, Govinda? That's a difficult question, Nishad Baba, Govinda answered quietly. Adults don't cry unless there's a good enough reason. Like what? 7 asked impatiently. Well, I can speak for myself, said Govinda. Sometimes when I play my old flute, I remember my village. I think of my childhood and my parents, my sister and my wife, who are all gone now. I think of the green paddy fields and the bullocks drawing water from the well on our farm. I can almost hear the sounds of the river. The cowbells and the birds chirping in the early morning and the smell of wet earth after the first monsoon showers. When one remembers all these things, my eyes fill with tears. Govinda had a faraway look in his eyes. Do people cry when they're very poor? Nishad asked. Yes, they might, Govinda told him. When they're so poor that they can't feed their children or buy them any clothes, what else can they do? Sometimes people cry when they're very lonely, without any family or friends. Sometimes they cry when someone they dearly love dies. That's true, Govinda, Nishad interrupted. We all cried and cried so much when Papa died. Mama cried the most, didn't she? As though you remember, 7, you were just a baby then. I said. But I was quite grown up. I do remember. I noticed Govinda quickly brushing tears away with the back of one hand. Enough talk about crying, my little ones, he said, lifting Nishad off his lap. You've got a long, happy life ahead of you. I want you both to grow up and be fine, kind and considerate people, so that your mother can be proud of you. Come on now, let me give you some dinner. During the first 2 weeks of July, we didn't go with Mama to Girgaon as it had been raining almost continuously. One Thursday, there was a break in the making friends with a crook 43. Showers and the sun shone brightly, so Mama took us with her to the clinic. As planned, Nishad and I walked towards the door of number 10. We stood outside the door arguing about who should be the one to knock. The door suddenly opened and the man's body filled the door frame. Hello, he said. May we come in, please? 7 asked. He looked puzzled. Maya and I want to be your friends, Mr. Nath, Nishad told him. I was seething. I certainly didn't want to be a crook's friend, I just wanted to know more about him. I kept quiet. Mr. Nath just stood there staring at us. Well, aren't you going to ask us in? I said, voicing my impatience. Mama says it's bad manners to keep people you know standing at the door. She says you must always invite them in except when they're strangers. For them, we leave the chain on the door. But you know us, don't you? Yes, of course, he said, moving away from the door so that we could enter. We quickly went in before he changed his mind. Nishad sat on the only chair and I, on the steel trunk. The man stood near the bed looking bewildered. Won't you sit down? I asked politely. He sat on the bed. Hey, we want to be your friends, Mr. Nath, Nishad said again. How shall we do that? He asked. Was he looking amused? I couldn't tell. We could come and chat with you, Nishad said. What shall we chat about? The man asked. About anything. Crime, if you like, I said, watching his reaction. He was obviously a good actor, his expression didn't change one bit. We could play marbles together, or chess or Scrabble, Nishad suggested. You don't have any books, we could lend you some, but you'll have to be very careful with them. Mama would get angry if anything happened to Papa's books. Won't he be angry too? Asked Mr. Nath. He can't ever get angry because he's dead, you see, Nishad explained. Oh, I'm so sorry, mumbled the man. He looked away from us, gazing down at the floor. His silence was becoming embarrassing. Come on, Nishad, I said, I think I hear Mama calling us. As I got up, I tried pushing the trunk with my feet. It wouldn't budge, it was so heavy. I saw that, Maya, said Nishad as we walked back to the clinic. The trunk's so heavy, Nishad J said, it's probably full of gold and jewels. Making friends with a crook 45. Art ISLU equals ULVAYN do A, comma it SS. ANOTA. Equals P equals A equals A equals A L it equals page gont zue PT and tani TTIO. THS and HNS IHHS HFA HL and AMWHGOE ILNYY SAR EZS and KMOKY AMI Elena. You've got a one-track mind, said Seven, and some imagination. We must look inside it, I'm sure there's something in there. I didn't know then that PD get the opportunity to do so very soon thereafter. During the following weeks, I went alone with Mama to Girgaon as Nishad A's had football practice. Leaving Mama near her clinic door, I rushed down to Mr. Nat's room and rapped loudly on the door. As soon as it was opened, I barged in and sat on the chair before he could say anything. Hello. How are you? I asked. Very well, thank you, and you? Said he. Fine, thank you. Have you seen the policeman, Mr. Nath? One was watching his reaction. Which one? He asked quite calmly. He was indeed a good actor. There's a tall, muscular one asking a lot of questions downstairs, I told him seriously. Questions? About what? I don't know, I whispered. But I hear he's trying to find someone. I was sure he looked a little startled. He kept quiet. Are you scared? Of policemen? I asked. Should I be? He questioned. Only if you've done something wrong, I told him. Again, he kept quiet. Eeks! I suddenly screamed, jumping off the bed. Watch out, Mr. Nath. I just saw a creepy, crawly spider going into your trunk. Don't worry, I'll get him out, I'm not scared. Making friends with a crook. I quickly opened the lid of the trunk and hastily rifled through its contents. As I did so, I felt a shiver go up my spine. I quickly closed the lid and looked up to see the man watching me intently, rubbing the forest on his face. I smiled at him. I guess the spider's too clever for us, he got away, Mr. Nath. By the way, is that your real name? I queried. Seeing his puzzled look, I went on, I was just curious, you see. There are so many people who change their names. He seemed anxious, so I quickly said, can you imagine being born with a surname like Soda Water Bottle Opener Valla? Wouldn't you change it? Or Cutlery Walla or Bonzetta Valla? A friend of mine swears these are real names. He was actually smiling. That gave me some encouragement. You know, there's a friend of Mamma's, I continued, whose surname is Doctor, and he's a doctor, so he's called Doctor Doctor, and there's a boy in Nishad's class whose surname is Master. That makes him Master Master and his dad Mr. Master, and sadly, his name is Dara Ardeshir, and that makes him DAM. Do you get it? But it's alright, it's not a bad word, the N is missing. What are your initials, Mr. Nath? He said, shaking his head, looking amused. Time for me to be bold, I thought. R for robber, I asked. SVUTLALELE. AA. This. Oh, yeah, greater than YSPYAAEAAAT. UAOG VLETTAJGRHQ at UAIRTE. Naturarat. ATADOS. As. On earn. Tas Uta equals plus triple A Nado LE8 PELTI 8 NZPA PR did hall A. QN bar ASH area RTN. TTT 1 ut 80 mutant. He less than. Sure, AOD Mr. Apista Navni DLCLMA making friends with a crook 49. Keep guessing, he said, getting up from the bed. Better get back to your mother, young lady, it's quite late. I couldn't wait to tell Nishad. As soon as we got home, I rushed into our bedroom where he was doing his homework and quickly closed the door. My dear, darling brother who doesn't believe a thing I tell, have I got news for you? I said excitedly. He looked up at me with curiosity. I know you won't believe me, I said sarcastically. I opened his trunk and what do you think I found? Gold. Seven's eyes were gleaming. No gold or jewels for that matter. I found a gun. What? He exclaimed, jumping out of his chair. Are you sure, or are you imagining things again? Do you take me for a fool? I asked angrily. It was a gun. It was wrapped up in a thick piece of cloth, but that didn't fool me. I distinctly felt the barrel of the gun through the cloth. Have you ever felt a real gun, Maya? Nishad asked. I don't have to hold a gun to know what it looks like, stupid, I said. I've seen hundreds of guns with policemen and in pictures and at the movies. I don't make silly mistakes, I know it was a gun. 50A. What else did you find in the trunk? 7 asked. Only some clothes, nothing else of importance. I guess he keeps the gun just in case the police arrive. Do you know, I got a little scared when I realized what it was. He could easily have shot me. How many people do you think he's killed with it? I asked. None, I hope, said Nishad with eyes wide open. By the way, his name begins with an R, I said, looking rather pleased with myself. I told him about my conversation with the man. Nishad had been thinking quietly, his arm crossed on his chest. I don't know, Maya, all this business about cops and robbers, I don't like it. It might be very dangerous. Supposing he's really a crook and he has a gun, he might kill us if he thinks we know too much. I smiled at him. So you finally believe me now, do you? High time. Don't worry about him, what can he do to us in a building full of people, with Mama just round the corner? All we need to do is to scream loudly and they'd all come and rescue us. Nishad looked satisfied. I was beginning to get a little worried and scared too, but I couldn't tell him that. RP for robber. T was September. The monsoon was about to end. We hadn't gone with Mama to Girgaon for quite a few weeks. One Monday evening after she returned from the clinic, she suddenly said as we sat around the dinner table, "Oh, that poor man." Which poor man? I couldn't help asking. Mr. Nath at Shankar House, she said. He's been running a very high temperature for quite a few days. No one knew about it except that little Ramesh came and told me that the Sahib was ill and that he's been returning uneaten trays of food for the past 3 or 4 days. He's been surviving just on tea. I went with Ramesh to Mr. Nath's room and found him burning with fever. I've left medicines for him, of course, but I wish there was someone to look after him. He's so weak, he could hardly speak. Will he die, Mama? Nishad asked. There was a tremble in his voice. No, he won't, Mama smiled as she ruffled his hair, but he'll feel quite exhausted with the fever and the starvation. Can we come and see him this Thursday when you go to Girgaon? I asked. Do you know him? Said Mama, and then, oh yes, I forgot. He's your monster, isn't he? No, no, Mama, we now think he's a. I quickly pinched Nishad into silence before he could say crook. When we were in bed, I turned to Nishad. We mustn't let him die, Nishad, or we won't become heroes. We'd better take him something to eat so that he regains his strength. And so that Thursday, Nishad and I pooled in some money and bought 6 bananas, a loaf of bread and some cream cheese before setting out for Girgaon with Mother. His door was ajar, we knocked, pushed it open and went in. Mr. Nath was sitting on the chair, gazing blankly into space. We must have startled him out of his daydream. Are you feeling better, Mr. Nath? Nishad asked. The man nodded. Are you still feeling weak? I asked. He nodded again. You should drink plenty of milk and eat lots of proteins to make you strong again, I said, imitating Mama's doctor tone. Here, we've brought you some nourishing food. I handed a little bag to him. For Robber 53. He smiled as he peeked into the plastic bag. Don't you have anyone to look after you? Nishad asked him. The man shook his head. Take care then, Seven said as we got up to leave. I had been feeling under the mattress whilst I sat on the bed. It would have been easy to hide jewels under it. But I found nothing. On our return home, the three of us sat in the study listening to a recording of Pannalal Ghosh, the famous flautist, as we waited for Govinda to get dinner ready. Mama was explaining the grammar of the morning raga he was playing. Every raga has its own mood, grammar and rules, she told us. There are certain notes you can play in the ascending scale of Aroha and certain ones you play in the Avaroha on the descending scale. Needless to say, Seven sat entranced. After Govinda had told us our bedtime story, Mama tucked us in and kissed us good night. When she left the room, Nishad said to me, Maya, I think I'll play my flute for Mr. Nath the next time we meet him. That might cheer him up a bit. He always looks so sad. Okay, I said. You know, Seven, I've been thinking. I felt under Mr. Nath's mattress today but didn't find any loot. Now where do you think it's hidden? Do you think he's buried it somewhere in that room? Or do you suppose PM right in thinking 24Y? That his Sunday friend has it. Stop it, Maya, said Nishad. You talk such nonsense. I don't think he's a robber or a crook at all. In fact, I rather like him. Don't get so worked up, I scolded. And believe me, it's not as if I dislike him. I admire him, I really do. If he's been in hiding for such a long time and has got away with it, he must be really very clever. Tell you what, Nishad, let's try to meet his Sunday friend to find out more. Mama never goes to the clinic on Sundays, so how can we meet him? You smart girl, please tell me, said Seven. I needed time to think of an answer. The following week, Nishad went with Mama to the clinic and I went to a friend's party. They picked me up on the way home and I talked non-stop about the exciting games we'd played at Dilshad's house. I wondered why Seven was so unusually quiet. When we got home, I offered him half the sweets Dilshad had given me and suddenly noticed that his eyes were brimming with tears. What's the matter, Nishad? I asked, putting my arm around his shoulder. Do you want more sweets? He shook his head. Mr. Nath was nasty again, Maya. I don't think I want to see him again. Why? What happened? I asked. I took my flute along to cheer him up. I stood for Robber 55. Outside his door and began to play and again he shouted loudly, Go away. How could he be so rude to his friend? He didn't know it was you, did he, silly? Had he known it was his friend, he wouldn't have shouted, I'm sure. It consoled him. I sat thinking. Seven, I said, do you realize that the first time he yelled at you, you were also playing the flute? Maybe he doesn't like music, perhaps it upsets him or something. Nishad looked shocked. You're joking, Maya, aren't you? How can anybody in the whole world not like music? Anyway, whatever his reason for shouting, I've decided not to see him again. To hell with him. You can't say that, Seven, I protested. We have to meet him again and again till we have some proof to hand him over to the police. We still haven't a clue about the loot, and the only way we can find out anything is to keep on meeting him, don't you see? You go meet him, Maya, said Seven. I'm not coming and I don't want to have anything to do with him. So I did go and meet him by myself. I remember it was the first day of the Ganesh festival, and on the journey to Girgaon, I saw ever so many clay images of my favorite elephant-headed god being taken to people's homes. I love dear Ganapati, dear Ganesh, the cheerful pot-bellied god of wisdom and good fortune. His image is brought into homes on the first day of the festival of Ganesh Chaturthi and is immersed into the sea after several days of festivity. As usual, I am digressing, but I would like to mention while I am on the subject that one day I had asked Abba why we Hindus have so many gods. He explained that there's only one God, and it makes no difference whether you call him Vishnu or Shiva or Allah or Christ. It's just that people all over the world give him different names. But let me get back to my story. I went into Mr. Nath's room that day and found him sitting on his bed. How are you? I asked. Much better, thank you, he said. Did your friend who comes on Sundays look after you? I asked boldly. He looked surprised. I know all about him, you know, I said. I see, said the man. Who was he? I couldn't help asking. Mr. Nath smiled. I thought you knew all about him. Where does he live? I quickly asked. Pune. Is he a relative? I asked. Mr. Nath shook his head. A friend. He nodded. Do you trust him? I asked. He nodded again, _57. Puzzled by my questioning. One decided to be even bolder. Aren't you scared he'll give you away? Mr. Nath got up suddenly. What do you mean? He said. I got just a little bit worried. Nothing, Mr. Nath, I said nervously. What I meant was, aren't you afraid that he'll tell all the tenants in Shankar house that you're not such a bad man? They're all scared of you, you know. Nishad and I know, and your friend knows that you're not as nasty as they make you out to be. Aren't you worried that if your friend tells them you're okay, they'll all come and harass you and want to make friends with you? But don't worry, cross my heart, we won't tell anyone. You can trust us like you trust your Pune friend. We're your friends and we won't let you down. Phew. That was a long speech to get out of a tight corner. I watched him to see how he reacted. He looked puzzled at my prattling. I wisely decided to change the subject. You haven't asked why Nishad hasn't come to see you today, I said. Where is he? He asked. At home, sulking. Would you like to see him again? Yes, of course, he replied. Then why did you shout at him? I asked indignantly. 58 why? Did one? Said Mr. Nath, looking even more puzzled. Yes, you did, you've really hurt his feelings. He doesn't want to see you anymore, I told him. Oh, I'm sorry. He said. Why don't you write him a note saying you'd like to see him again? I suggested. I looked around the room. I don't suppose you have any paper and pencils here. Mr. Nath shook his head. Wait, Hahu just run down to Mama's office and get some, I said, rushing out of his room. I went to Mama's clinic and tore off a page from one of her prescription pads, picked up a pencil from her table and returned to the man's room. I thrust them into his hand and said, Now write. What shall I write? He asked. Why don't you apologize for shouting at him? I know he'll forgive you, Nishad's very kind-hearted. Whatever you say, young lady, he said, picking up the pencil. I heard him mumble as he started to write. I don't remember shouting at him, though. He handed the note to me. You haven't signed it, I told him. He quickly scrawled something on the paper and returned it to me. He had signed it, Arnath. Why don't you write your full name? I said. I was asking for too much, I know. No, it's fine the way it is, he told me. For Robert GN59. I wished him goodbye and charged back to the clinic, bumping into my mother as she came out of her door. Watch it, Maya, do you want to knock me down? She said, sounding quite exasperated. What have you been up to now? I couldn't help looking towards Mr. Nath's room at the end of the corridor. Have you been harassing Mr. Nath again? Mama asked. Not at all, Mum, I told her. Come on, let's go home, Seven must be waiting for us. I was hoping to distract her attention from the subject of Mr. Nath. I couldn't wait to get home. Nishad was playing the flute for Aber and Gigi, who had dropped in on their way home from a concert. He was trying a folk tune that Govinda had taught him recently and he played it very well. The boy's good, Suma, I heard Aber tell Mama. We really must find him a good teacher soon. Hasn't Jaspal recommended anyone yet? She asked. I beckoned Seven to follow me into our bedroom whilst Mama was busy chatting with our grandparents. Look, Seven, told him excitedly, holding the note out to him. Look what I've got for you. Seven read it aloud. Dear Nishad, please come and see me again soon. I'm sorry if I shouted at you. Nath, he looked at me suspiciously and asked, Are you sure you haven't written this yourself, Maya? 60. Can't you recognize my handwriting? Stupid. I asked angrily. Get to think of it, you're right. How could I mistake this neat hand for your messy scrawl? Said Seven. Nishad looked at the note again and asked, Did you force him to write it? Cross my heart, I didn't, I told him, pinching my neck. He wrote it himself. I'm sure he does want to see me again. Nishad was smiling. That means he does like me. I'm sure he does. I haven't told you everything yet, wait till you hear. I said. I repeated the evening's conversation. You should have seen his face when I questioned him about whether he trusts his Pune friend Nishad, I told him. For a minute I was really scared. If he had realized that I know him to be a crook, he might have done something horrible to me, kidnapped me or killed me or kept me a prisoner or something. But I was too clever for him. I quickly changed the subject and talked my way out of what could have been a tricky situation. What do you think R stands for, Maya? Nishad said. Rohit, Rajiv, Ranjit, Roshan. We really should make a list of possible names. But it's probably something like Roga, Robber or Rascal. Or maybe it's Ravana, he might be named after the 10-headed demon king of the Ramayana. I giggled. For Robber 61. Don't be ridiculous, Maya, said Nishad. I was busy writing names in my notebook. I wrote quietly for a few minutes. How does this sound to you, Seven? I asked, does chivalrous children catch clever crook sound better than courageous kids? What are you talking about now, Maya? Nishad sounded irritated. I'm planning the headlines in the papers when we catch him, I said. He's not a crook, you dimwitty, Nishad shouted. He's a nice man and he's my friend and don't you dare say anything nasty about him or I'll bash you up, I'm warning you. Pipsqueak, just you try. I said sarcastically. Gigi came into the room just then to call us for dinner and the subject was fortunately closed for the day. Operation Haircut. He season change. The monsoon gave way to the sweltering October heat. Bombay's streets and buildings, which had looked so clean in the rains, once again began to acquire a new coating of grime and dust. We had holidays as Diwali was round the corner. It was time for the annual cleaning up to welcome Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth and prosperity. It was also time to buy new clothes, gifts and fireworks and to prepare the most delicious festive dishes for the season of rejoicing. Diwali sweets for the whole family were made at Gigi's house and then distributed to all her children and grandchildren. Nishad and I asked Mama if we could take some for Mr. Nath. She looked surprised but gave her consent. Armed with a plastic box full of goodies, we went to see Mr. Nath on our next trip to Girgaon. Nishad was so happy to see him again. I glanced around the room. Aren't you going to clean up your room for Diwali? Mama and Govinda on haircut 63. Have already finished cleaning our home, I told him. Who's Govinda? The man asked, and Nishad explained. I think we'd better help you clean, I said. We'll just get a duster from Mama's clinic. Before he could say anything, I ran to the clinic and returned with a broom and duster. Come on, Nishad, I said, you use while one sweep. Mr. Nath stood watching us for a minute or two, then quietly took the duster from Seven's hands and began to wipe the chair. One was thrilled to have the golden opportunity to look around the room. One looked in vain for any freshly dug portions in the floor. With Nishad's help, I turned over the mattress on the bed. There was nothing beneath it. There were no hidden nooks and crannies either. It didn't take us more than 20 minutes to tidy the room since there was hardly any furniture. Nishad sat on the trunk, the man on the bed, and I on the chair. I was staring at his face without meaning to be rude. Now that your room looks so neat, can we do something about you, Mr. Nath? I asked. He looked astonished. What's wrong with me? It's that jungle on your face, you'd look less wild. Without it, I said, pointing at his beard and then his long hair. Nishad was a little more polite. If you had a haircut and a shave, you'd really look nice, Mr. Nath, he said. Nothing is wrong with my beard, he said adamantly, stroking it slowly. All right, just a haircut then, I said. I'm an expert hairdresser, I'll trim it very well. Nishad looked aghast, but before he could utter a protest, I jumped up and left the room. I came back from the clinic armed with Mama's surgical scissors and an enamel bow in which she usually kept bandages. With her consent, I had also taken a comb and mirror from her handbag. Come, sit on this chair, Mr. Nath, I told him. As he got up from the bed, I removed the counterpane and draped it around his shoulders when he sat on the chair. Nishad, you can help with the operation. I mean, haircut, I said. Nishad glowered. What the hell do you think you're doing, Maya? He asked angrily. Don't disturb me, I'm giving Mr. Nath a haircut, I said firmly. I put my finger on my mouth, gesturing him to keep quiet. Mr. Nath looked uneasy, but sat quietly. I started to comb out his long, straight, black hair which looked clean and smelled of soap. I could see a few grey hairs scattered over the scalp, and more prominently evident at the temples. While Nishad continued to glare at me, I snipped at a handful of hair. I went on snipping and chopping, pausing to admire my handiwork every now and then. I soon 65. A-N-A. A. S-U-N-U-W-A-A. A. J. A-U-N-W-F. A-N. S-U-N-S. Ye. Live. Us S-S-S. A. O-S. Sto. A. An. R-S. 2. A. 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 D. A. I. A. It. A. A. P. N. Z. D. A. P. R. A. O. A. D. L. A. T. I. A. A. S. A. R. R. A. O. S. W. A. D. B. A. D. B. I. A. S. L. A. R. A. 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 S. Q. L. A. A. R. R. I. A. S. A. N. Et. Dash. 5. A. Y. 3. S. O. T. P. A. A. S. A. 1. T. Y. A. N. S. Q. A. L. I. O. S. Y. A. P. A. A. D. M. A. A. S. Y. Y. A. A. T. L. T. 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 R. S. A. C. L. P. A. O. N. S. T. S. I. A. B. A. 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 Y. C. A. S. A. S. A. W. L. T. U. Y. P. A. L. L. I. N. N. 4. J. F. A. A. M. C. A. S. G. O. Pin Medal Arbile. Asamites. O. R. M. A. M. T. 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 I. L. E. L. Upper M equals H. H. Set at lay. A equals T. A. A. S. X. F. A. 8. Peller A. A. Oil realized, however, that something was not quite right. His hair looked like it shouldn't. Somehow, the edges seemed a little too jagged. I held up the enamel bowl one had borrowed from Mama and placed it on Mr. Nath's head. Now what are you doing for goodness sake? Nishad asked, still scowling. I tried to sound confident. That's for the finishing touches, I said. The bowl will help me to cut evenly around the edges. The scissors were obviously at fault. They were either too blunt or too small because I still wasn't satisfied. Or was it indeed true that bad carpenters do blame their tools? Enough was enough. I dusted the hair off his neck and the counterpane, swept it up and put it into the enamel bowl. I gave a final comb out to his hair, placed Mama's mirror in his hand and said, "There you are, Mr. Nath, I'm through." "How handsome you look." "What rubbish." Seven yelled. "You look awful, Mr. Nath, as though a million moths or rats had chewed your hair." I closed my eyes in terror and placed my palms on my ears, waiting for the expected explosion from Mr. Nath. Suddenly I heard loud guffaws of laughter. I opened my eyes and what do you think I saw? Mr. Nath was actually roaring with laughter. I couldn't believe my luck. I couldn't understand it. Had he gone mad or did he really like the haircut, I wondered. Operation I rose N 67. "I do look funny, don't I?" he said. "You've made me look like a clown." I decided it was a good moment to bid him goodbye. I caught Nishad's hand and dragged him out as I whispered a quick good night. It was time to retreat graciously. The mystery unravels. The remaining days of the Diwali holidays were spent with our uncle and his family in Uttarakhand, a hill station. We returned 2 days before school reopened and went with Mama to Shankar House. I was a little afraid of meeting Mr. Nath again after the episode of the haircut. The door to his room was half open, so Nishad and I knocked and went in. A stranger was sitting on the bed. Was he the Sunday accomplice? "Where's Mr. Nath?" asked Nishad. The stranger smiled. "Don't you recognize me?" he asked. We stared at him in astonishment. "Hae, it's you, Mr. Nath," Nishad exclaimed. "But what happened to your beard?" Mr. Nath rubbed his clean-shaven face. Then he looked towards me and said, "Well, I asked the barber to repair the damage caused by a young lady I know, and whilst I was there, I decided to have a shave as well." The Unravel 69. "You look quite handsome, Mr. Nath," Nishad told him. "Nonsense. I'm an ugly old fellow," he protested. I quietly gazed at his face. Yes, Mama had been right. He did have burn scars. The skin on the right side of his face was pinkish and puckered up. There was also a thin, long, white scar running from his lower lip down towards the chin, finally ending in the middle of his neck. The beard and moustache had hidden the scars very well. Without the hair on his face, Mr. Nath looked thinner, but much younger. He seemed to be about Mama's age, in his mid or late 30s. His features appeared sharper. The nose looked more prominent and the chin stronger. The eyes too looked larger, but there was a dreamy, faraway look in them. Nishad was right. In spite of the scars, he did look quite handsome. Nishad rubbed his forefinger along the scars. "How did you get these?" he asked. "Cut myself shaving," the man joked. He couldn't possibly tell us the truth, I thought. It would have been a confession of his crimes. My gaze wandered around the room. Something was different. My heart almost stopped beating when I suddenly noticed the package lying on top of his trunk. I couldn't be mistaken. It was the very same one I had found inside the trunk. And the gun was in it. I could see the outline of the barrel through the cloth. As the man must have noticed my mouth hanging open. "What's the matter?" he asked. Nishad's gaze followed mine to the package on the trunk. I couldn't answer, but I said the first thing that came to mind, "CC, could I see your GG gun?" One stammered. "Oh Lord. What had I said? Suppose he shot me." "Gun," said a puzzled Mr. Nath. "That's no gun." He picked up the object and unwrapped it. I held my breath. Out came a beautiful bronze statue. "It's Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom and music holding her veena," said Nishad, picking up the statue. I took the image from his hand. It was heavy. I had obviously mistaken the long stem of the stringed musical instrument, the veena, for a gun. Anyone is entitled to make mistakes, after all. "Where did you get it, Mr. Nath?" "It's so beautiful," said Nishad. "It was a gift," said Mr. Nath, closing his eyes and leaning back in the chair. He opened them when he heard Mama's voice at the door calling our names. Mama smiled at him, saying, "Are they being a nuisance, Mr. Nath?" The man got up from the chair. "No, not at all," he told her. We were ready to leave. My brain worked rapidly all the way home, but I didn't say a word in Mama's presence. I hardly heard the Unravel 71. Govinda's story at night, I was so busy thinking. As soon as he had switched off our light and left the room, I sat up in bed. Don't go to sleep, Seven, I said. I have the whole mystery figured out. Nishad sat up too. He's a smuggler, I announced. Someone who deals in stolen, valuable antiques. I'm sure he gets them secretly out of the country. Don't be daft, Maya, said Nishad angrily. He told us it was a gift. Did you expect him to tell the truth? I asked sarcastically. You're so naive, Nishad, I told him smugly. I had vivid dreams that night, just like some of the Hindi movie stories. They were all about gangsters and smugglers and boat chases on the high seas and of course, brave heroines who caught the bad guys. By the morning I had another brainwave. Do you think the statue's hollow? I asked Nishad at the breakfast table. Maybe it's stuffed with diamonds or drugs like heroin or brown sugar and then it's been sealed up. I noticed the angry gleam in his eyes as he quickly got up from his chair. It was time for a fight. I pushed back my chair before he could attack. He chased me around the table, shouting, "You idiot, you moron, how dare you say nasty things about my friend." With all the noise going on, Mama and Govinda and F both came into the dining room, she from her room, he from the kitchen. Stop it, both of you, at once, she commanded. You tell her not to say mean things about my friends, Mama, Nishad complained angrily. I apologized quickly before he could say more. He refused to talk to me for 2 whole days after that, but cheered up that weekend when Gigi and Abba took us to hear a flute recital by the talented maestro Hariprasad Chaurasia at the open-air theatre, Rang Bhavan. I snoozed for a while around midnight, but Nishad sat intently till 2 in the morning when the concert ended. We slept late the next morning. It was a Saturday and there was no school. As soon as he woke up, Nishad made Mama hum Raga Bhairavi which Mr. Chaurasia had played early that morning. She sang it and hummed it, over and over again till Nishad got the ascending and descending notes of the scale right. We went to bed early that evening, still tired from the late night. I must have had a nightmare because I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night. What had I dreamt? I couldn't remember. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. Something was bothering me. I tried counting sheep, but it didn't work. I thought of happy things, but sleep wouldn't come. I closed my eyes and thought of the flute recital and the flautist playing with rapt attention, his eyes closed. I could picture his profile shadowed with the transverse flute, the Unravel 73, held to his lips. Where had I seen that pose before? On one of our record jackets. Yes. Suddenly, I was wide awake. Could it be? I wondered. Oh my God. Yes, it must be. I shot out of bed and shook Nishad till he was awake. I was so excited that I almost pulled him off the bed, loudly whispering, "Come quickly, Nishad, come with me." "Let me sleep, Maya," he said softly, "I'm so tired." "You have to wake up," I said, shaking him. "I know that face, I know who he is." "Who?" said Nishad, still bleary-eyed. "Have you had a bad dream?" No, no. I said, "I'm talking about your great friend, Mr. Nath. Now come with me." I pulled him up by the hand and dragged him to the study. Not wanting to wake up Govinda or Mama, I pulled the door shut behind us. I didn't switch on the overhead light. Mama might see it through the ventilator window. The room was bright enough with the glow from the street lamps. I switched on my battery-operated torch as I opened the drawer to the cabinet where Mama kept our collection of audio cassettes in alphabetical order. Do you remember the last time we met Mr. Nath, 7? When Mama came to call us, he was sitting with his head down and eyes closed. I've seen that look before. The same expression and pose. The same face, as a matter of fact, I said as I quickly found the S cassette I was looking for. I pulled it out and thrust it into Seven's hand. There, I said. This is Ravindranath Sharma's flute recording, Maya. Nishad looked puzzled. Oh, Nishad, it's Mr. Nath, don't you see? I said impatiently. Seven looked at the photograph on the plastic cassette cover. No, it isn't. Mr. Nath's face is much leaner than this. I remembered something. I opened the door to the lower shelves of the music cabinet housing our record collection, which we hardly played these days. The audio cassettes were so much more convenient. We had a long playing record of the same recording, I knew. I looked for it, found it, held it up and shone my torch on it. It was the same portrait of the maestro, much larger than that on the cassette. It showed the musician playing the transverse flute with his eyes closed. His slender fingertips were gently caressing the tone holes. Is it really Mr. Nath? Nishad asked doubtfully. The name, not the same. Use your brain, idiot, I said, don't you see? The flautist's name is Ravindranath Sharma and our man's name is Ard. Nath. I want to hear the cassette, Nishad said unreasonably. 2RNN-E-G-R-P-R-O-W-A-S-K-A-A-A-T. I turned down the wall, the soft strains of the... I turned down, I was worried. I turned down the volume and joined Nishad. I was... Why? Not TNT or OTSF, now. Are you crazy? You'll wake up Mama, I said, but before I could stop him, he had inserted the cassette into the player and switched it on. I was worried. I turned down the volume and joined Nishad, who was sitting cross-legged on the carpet. The soft strains of the early evening raga Shri flooded the room. The flautist was rendering the alap, introducing the notes of the raga in a slow, free rhythm with the accompanying tanpura droning its 4 notes. We had heard the recording so many times, but now it had a special meaning. The music went into the jawed, played in a faster, rhythmic tempo. As Sharma began the melodious gad to the accompaniment of the percussion tabalas, the study door burst open. There stood Mother, with Govinda's head peering over her shoulder. She entered the room and switched on the light. What do you think you're doing? She asked, loud and clear. Nishad quickly got up and switched off the player. We couldn't sleep, Mama, so we were just listening to some music, he told her. Get back to bed, both of you, Mother commanded, right this instant. We hastily left the room and got into bed. We heard Mama closing the study door. She paused for a moment outside our room. We lay in silence until we heard her bedroom door close. I saw Nishad quietly get up from the bed. A. The mystery unravels _N77. Be back in a moment, Maya, he whispered, opening our room door. Now what was he up to? I sat up in the bed anxiously waiting for his return. He tiptoed back into the room with a record under his arm. He went into the bathroom, turned on the light and called me in. Maya, draw a mustache and beard on the face, please, he said, holding out a black pencil towards me. I looked at the record, it was the one by Ravindranath Sharma. Mama will be furious if we damage the cover, Nishad, I pleaded. Please, Maya, we'll erase the pencil lines afterwards. I was just as curious as he was. Without a second thought, I sat on the bathroom stool and quickly drew dark, black lines to cover the face in the picture. My God! It is Mr. Nath! Nishad screamed, peering over my shoulder. Indeed it was. Our Mr. Nath in hiding was the famous flautist, Ravindranath Sharma. I can't believe it, Maya, what are we going to do? Nishad looked excited but worried. He might still be a crook, Nishad. Why else would he be living in secrecy? Why, don't you dare. Nishad protested. You heard his music so often, Maya, how can you possibly think he's a criminal? No, he is not a crook. 78A. We can still be famous, 7. If he's been hiding all these months, people in the music world must be looking for him. We can still make it to the headlines. How about masterminds meet mysterious missing musician? Never. Nishad was really angry. We'll never do that. He's our friend and we can't let him down. If he's hiding, he must have a reason. We better not tell anybody about him, Maya, and we mustn't let Mr. Nath guess that we know his identity, otherwise he'll disappear. Promise. I had been unsuccessfully trying to erase the pencil lines from the record jacket. All right, I promised, 7, I said. For goodness sake, 7, you gave me Mama's indelible eye pencil, this will never come off. Was I worried? The prodigy. We hardly ever played that record, Nishad, and I felt quite guilty about spoiling it. We checked our piggy banks and found we had just enough to buy a new record. One evening after school, we strolled down with Govinda to Rhythm House, a music shop not too far from our house. Poor Govinda didn't know what we were up to but seemed satisfied with the explanation that we were working on a school project. We asked the salesman at the counter to give us all the recordings by Rabindranath Sharma. He came back with 4 records. I quickly studied the covers to see if there was any information about the musician. The one we had damaged had merely described the ragas played. I looked at the remaining 3. Only one of them had something about the artist. Nishad had his pencil and notebook ready. I read aloud as he wrote, Rabindranath Sharma was born in Jaipur in Rajasthan. Son of the famous sitarist Kundan Lal Oof Sharma, Rabindranath began to play the sitar at the age of 4 under the guidance of his father. 3 years later, he switched over to the flute and began studying the intricacies of the instrument. A child prodigy, he gave his first solo performance on the flute at the age of 9. Since then, Sharma has given innumerable performances in India and abroad and ranks today as one of the most outstanding flautists in the country. He is always accompanied on the tanpura by his wife, Uma. But our Mr. Nath isn't married, Maya, said Nishad, looking up from his notebook. We don't know everything about him, do we? I said. What does prodigy mean, Maya? Nishad asked. I didn't know, but naturally I didn't want to display my ignorance before my younger brother. It's at the tip of my tongue, 7, I said. I'll tell you when we get home. After looking it up in the dictionary, I bet, said Mr. Know-all. We bought a copy of the record we had damaged and walked home. I quickly put it back with the other records in our collection and hid the damaged one below a pile of clothes in my wardrobe. Whilst Nishad was chatting to Govinda in the kitchen, I pulled out the dictionary from my school satchel and looked up the word. The Prodi 81X. Did you want to know the meaning of prodigy? I asked, walking into the kitchen. A prodigy is a person born with some surprising quality, like a wonderful gift. I suppose it means that Mr. Nath was born to music. If his ability to play is a gift of God, why has he stopped playing, Maya? 7 asked. And why is he hiding himself if he's such a famous musician? Do you think he's self-conscious about his scars? He didn't try to hide them from us, Maya, said Nishad. Let's go and talk to Uncle Jaspal. Since he knows so many musicians, he may have something to tell us about Mr. Nath, I suggested. On Sunday, with Mama's permission, we walked down to the apartment block at nearby Cooperage where Mr. Jaspal Singh lived. He wasn't too surprised to see us. So you've come about the teacher, Nishad. I've been making inquiries and I think by next month we should have an excellent flute teacher for you, little one, he said. Before you begin your lessons, we'll have to get you a proper transverse flute. You'll have to put away your little bamboo toy. I want to be a really good musician, Uncle, said Nishad. But first of all I want to know something about all the famous Indian flautists. Let's have something to drink first, suggested 2JJ Mr. Singh. We went into the kitchen and helped ourselves, then sat down in the comfortable cane chairs in the balcony. Suppose I should start with the late Pannalal Ghosh, began Mr. Singh. He was responsible for transforming a simple folk instrument to a concert flute. He was the first to devise a tenor flute. The bansuri of North India was a soprano instrument. Ghosh's flute is 32 inches long, difficult to handle of course because the tone holes are widely spaced, but you'll get the hang of it in time, my boy. Tell us something about the other flautists too, Uncle, I said impatiently. There's Hari Prasad Chaurasia, what a fine performer. What about Rabindranath Sharma? I interrupted, more enthusiastically than rudely. Ah yes, Sharma, said Mr. Singh. Great talent, my children, he's a genius. Such pitching. Such great tonal qualities, such magic in his recitals. Of course he's inherited his talent from his father who was a wonderful sitar player. Sharma was giving concert recitals when he was your age, Nishad. You'll have to work very hard if you want to reach his standard. You'll have to work hard at your riyaz every day. Where does he live, Uncle? Can I meet him? 7 asked. The Prodi 83. He lives in Delhi. But wait a minute, said Mr. Singh, tapping his chin with his forefinger. Actually, nobody knows where Sharma is these days. In fact, no one knows where he's been for the last 2 years or so. He has simply disappeared. Seven and I looked knowingly at each other. He hasn't completed the last recording he began with my company and he hasn't claimed any of his royalties either. Where has he gone? I asked innocently. I haven't the faintest idea, said Uncle Jaspal. How can we find out? Asked Nishad. I want to learn from him one day. Mr. Singh looked pensive. We could try asking Ali Khan, the famous tabla player. He's always accompanied Sharma at his performances and happens to be one of his oldest friends. Could we go and meet him? I asked eagerly. He lives in Pune, but he does come to Bombay occasionally for recordings. Try and find out when he's due here next, all right. Do you have his address? Asked Seven. What's the sudden interest in Sharma and Khan, may I ask? Said Mr. Singh. Without waiting for an answer, he went to the telephone table and returned with an address book. He wrote out something on a piece of paper and handed it to me. Here you are then. Why, we were both quiet on the way back home. After dinner, we sat together in our bedroom, ready to write a letter to Mr. Ali Khan. I wrote our address and telephone number and then began, Dear Mr. Khan, I have heard that you are a friend of Mr. Rabindranath Sharma, the famous flautist. I love to play the flute, but my teacher, Govinda, cannot teach me any more than what he has taught me already. He has taught me to play many folk tunes, but I want to learn classical music from Mr. Sharma. Could you please send me his address? Could we meet when you next come to Bombay? Please write to me at the address given at the top of my letter. Please don't tell your friend Mr. Sharma about me. I want it to be a surprise. Yours. Now sign it, Nishad, I told him. Why have you asked him not to tell Mr. Nath about me, Maya? We don't want him to know what we know, do we? I asked. A time for tears. I met the man again the following week. We knocked boldly and walked right into his room. Mr. Nath's back was to us. He was changing into a clean shirt. We were horrified to see that his back was crisscrossed with pink scars. He turned around as he heard me gasp. He was growing his beard again. Naturally, I wanted to know why. Too much trouble shaving every day, he explained. But you look so handsome without it, said Nishad. Me, handsome? I'm an ugly old fellow, he said. No, you're not, Nishad protested. I like your face. You remind me of Uncle Ajit, Mama's brother. He's the one who's moved to Delhi, you know. We're going to spend our Christmas holidays with him. Why, it will be great fun because his son, my cousin Amit, is my age and we get on very well together. Have you ever been to Delhi, Mr. Nath? I asked. He answered. Is it a nice city? He answered. We have ever so many cousins. How many do you have, Mr. Nath? Nishad wanted to know. None, he replied. Brothers, sisters? I asked. None, he repeated. Where are your parents? I continued. They passed away long ago, he told us. Are you married? Do you have any children? What is this, some kind of cross-examination? He asked. We didn't ask any more questions. At home, we naturally had to discuss the man. Why do you think he's growing his beard again, Nishad? I wondered. He's probably afraid that someone will recognize him. Or do you think he's ashamed of the scars? Maybe, I said. Did you see the scars on his back? They're ghastly. A time for years Y87. After dinner, I went into the study where Mama was reading a magazine. Can't Mr. Nath do something about his scars, Mama? I asked her. She looked puzzled. What made you think of him, darling? She asked. But of course he can. Plastic surgery would take care of them. He's got so many scars on his back too, one told her. 7 and I saw them today while he was changing his shirt. Why don't you tell him about plastic surgery, Mum? It's expensive, he might not be able to afford it. In any case, I don't think we should interfere in his personal affairs. I'm sure he can afford it, he must be quite rich if he's. Stopped myself in time. Anyway, I suppose it's his problem. The next day's mail brought an unexpected surprise, a reply from Bangalore from Mr. Ali Khan, the tabla player. He wrote, Dear Nishad, thank you for your letter which was forwarded to me in Bangalore where I have been participating in a music festival. I shall be here for the next fortnight but I shall be happy to meet you when I next come to Bombay. I usually travel on Sundays by the Deccan Queen and return to Pune the same evening. WFI am sorry to tell you that Mr. Ravindranath Sharma has stopped teaching. I could, however, suggest some other teacher for you since you seem keen on learning. I shall phone you when I next visit Bombay. With best wishes, yours sincerely, Ali Khan. My God! I exclaimed, he must be the Sunday friend who visits Mr. Nath regularly. Do you really think so? Seven sounded excited. I do hope he comes to Bombay soon. But why does he say Mr. Nath has stopped teaching? I'm so disappointed, he's such a superb player, there's so much magic in his music and PD truly loved to learn from him. I wanted him to do just that. When we went with Mama next to Girgaon, I asked Nishad to carry his flute. At Shankar House, as we walked towards Mr. Nath's door, I told him to go inside and play. Nothing doing, Maya, Seven protested. Much as I'd like to learn the flute under his guidance, I'm afraid he'll shout at me again. Don't worry, little brother. Now that he knows us quite well, I'm sure he won't be rude. In any case, I'm there to protect you. Nishad looked unsure. He hid the flute behind his back as we knocked and went in. Mr. Nath was sitting in the chair. We came to talk about something very important, a time for bars underscore N89. Mr. Nath, I began. Mother says you can get rid of those scars of yours with plastic surgery. Do you want the name of a good doctor? We can ask her. TM not entering any beauty contest, you know, he chucked. He closed his eyes and seemed deep in thought. I nudged Nishad and whispered, play. Raising the flute to his lips, Nishad began the first notes of one of Govinda's folk tunes. I was intently watching our man. His eyes suddenly opened, his body stiffened, his fists clenched. Before I knew what was happening, he shot out of his chair, yanked the flute out of Nishad's little hands, snapped it in two and flung the pieces onto the floor. He slapped my brother hard on his arm and bellowed, Don't you dare! Get out of here! Nishad looked stunned. His eyes filled with tears. I have never ever seen him so full of anguish. He ran out of the room before I could say a word. The man seemed shocked. He stood still, as though he was paralyzed. His shoulders slowly drooped, he covered his eyes with his hands and sat down in the chair. I was on the verge of tears, but I controlled them. I caught him by the shoulder and shook it as hard as I could. I hate you, you horrible, wicked man. I screamed through clenched teeth. How could you be so cruel to my gentle brother? We thought you were a crook in hiding, but you're worse than the worst possible tutu criminal. I hope I never see you in my life, Mr. Ravindranath Sharma. And then I walked out of the room. In the clinic, Mama was hugging Seven as he sobbed. It's all right, my little son. Don't cry so, it's only a flute. So what if it's broken? We'll get you another one. I realized he hadn't told her what had happened, although I knew he was terribly hurt inside. We were quiet on the journey home as well as during dinner. When we were getting ready for bed, I put my arms around Nishad and held him close. It's all right, Seven. Don't be upset. Govinda says it takes all kinds of people to make the world and we've been unfortunate enough to meet the worst. We'll just forget about it all and I'll buy you a new flute. I don't ever want to play the flute again, Nishad whimpered with tears rolling down his cheeks. I don't ever want to go with Mama to Shankar House again. Don't worry, Seven, we don't have to do anything you don't like, I consoled him, wiping his tears. I honestly couldn't help him in his suffering and it made me very sad. Remembering Papa. Couldn't sleep that night. It was just as well that Nishad fell asleep almost as soon as his head touched the pillow. My eyes brimmed with tears as I went over the day's happenings in my mind. Govinda was right. There are truly some very strange people in this world. I felt sad and helpless. Papa would never have been so cruel. He did have a quick temper, but it cooled just as quickly. He would never have willingly hurt anyone the way Mr. Nath had broken Nishad's heart. I missed Papa so much, his loving ways, his happy smile. Papa showered us with love and affection. I thought of the many times he had wiped our tears and bandaged our wounds. He used to tell us that our hurts and bruises caused him more grief than they did us. I recall the day I fell off the swing in nursery school when I was 4. Both my front teeth broke and my mouth swelled up and became a bleeding mess. Papa rushed to school as soon as the teacher NY phoned him and took me straight to the dentist for treatment. I howled and screamed on the dentist's chair and wouldn't let him come anywhere near me, so it was Papa who had to gently prise away the shaky pieces of teeth that were left in my gums and apply the antiseptic. I felt so self-conscious about being toothless until the permanent teeth grew out. Through those embarrassing months, Papa constantly told me that even without teeth I looked beautiful. That made me feel so much better, even though I had a feeling it wasn't true. I wished he could be with us again. I could see his face clearly, my memory helped perhaps by his many photographs in the house. Papa was not what they call handsome, but he had such a wonderful smile that it lit up his whole face. Papa loved us all very much, Mama, Nishad and me, but I knew I was very special to him. 7 He called me Tooch, it didn't mean anything, he said, but he liked the sound of it. Although he and Mama kept long working hours since they were doctors, both spent as much time as they could with us. It was Papa who taught me to fly kites and play marbles. He couldn't see any reason why a daughter should not play these games. Mama disapproved. She thought I'd become a tomboy. It was Papa who read to me at bedtime, explaining meanings and spelling out difficult words. Those nightly stories must have helped poor Vaijanomi with the English language because our English teachers at school have always praised my vocabulary and my essays. Papa had a wonderful sense of humor. He loved telling us jokes and he'd tease all of us, including Govinda. Once in a while, Mama would get irritated with his banter and she'd say, "Can't you ever be serious?" Papa would then put on a grim look and then he'd tell us another joke and we'd all be in splits of laughter, even Mama. On holidays, he and Mama would load a group of my friends into the car and take us to the aquarium or planetarium or the Museum of Natural History. Sometimes we'd walk around old areas in Bombay and Papa would tell us about the historic buildings and landmarks. Whenever he could, Papa took me roller skating, cycling or walking on Marine Drive. Nishad was, of course, too young then. One still remember the things he spoke about, incidents from his childhood, about friendships, sunsets, people, birds, music. Papa loved jazz and folk music. In the evenings, he'd play his guitar and sing to us in his loud, melodious voice. Sometimes he sang popular songs and even nursery rhymes. At other times, he'd sing folk songs and ballads. Nishad would clap his little hands in time to the music. PD sing with Papa and Mama would listen, her eyes filled with love for all of us. Mama is truly beautiful. How often I've wished that I looked like her, but in a way I'm happy that I Y7 resemble Papa so closely. Mama is not very tall, but she is slim and elegant. She has a lovely face with large, expressive brown eyes that mirror her feelings. She dresses well and she looks good whether she's in blue jeans, in salwar kameez or in a sari. Her clothes always look freshly laundered and stylish. Papa loved her in lemon yellow, so she wears that color often. What I love most about Mama is the clean smell about her and the whiff of perfume, except of course when she's been handling antiseptic and medicines for her patients. Mama has a mind of her own, at least that's what Aber and Gigi say. Mama has wanted us both to be well educated and independent, especially me, being a girl. I know that after Papa died, she supported us on her own, without taking help from her parents or brothers. When you grow up, she'd tell me time and again, I want you to be able to stand on your own 2 feet so that you can face any misfortune with courage. Just the way she did, I guess. Thinking about Mama reminded me of the clinic and Mr. Nath, and tears of anger, frustration and grief rolled down my cheeks. I went into the bathroom and washed my face and lay down again. Mama says that there are 2 sides to every story. Did Mr. Nath have a reason for what he did? I wondered. Why did he hit my brother and break his flute? What explanation could there possibly be for his strange behavior? Had he been in a bad mood? No, remember in 95. He had not. He had joked about our suggestion regarding plastic surgery. Did he dislike us? Over the months he seemed to have become quite fond of us. It had to be the flute, I thought. But how could it be so? Wasn't he a renowned musician himself? Why should the flute upset him? It was all very confusing. I needed my mother to help clear my thoughts. I quietly crept out of our room and peeked through Mama's door, which she kept open so that she could hear us in case Nishada I called out if, on occasion, we wanted to creep into her bed. She had done that ever since Papa died. For many months after his death I used to get terrible nightmares and I'd scream and cry. Mama would come right away and hold me till I fell asleep again. I went near her bed and found her sleeping. I lay down beside her and cuddled against her back. It was such a comforting feeling. Can't sleep, love, she said softly. No, Mama, I told her. I'm too angry and sad and upset. What about Maya? Mama asked in the gentlest of tones. About that horrid fellow in Shankar house, I said. Who? Which one? She asked. 7 inches, that awful Mr. Ravindranath Sharma who broke Seven's flute, I said angrily. Did I say that intentionally or had it slipped out? Mama sat up in bed. I don't understand, she said. Who are you talking about, and BD did he break Nishu's flute? Mr. Nath, Mama, I said. Then I kept quiet. Go on, darling, you called him Sharma, didn't you? I did, Mum. You know, actually he's Ravindranath Sharma, the great flute player. Mama was silent. Then she switched on her beside lamp. How do you know that? She asked softly. Wait, Mama, I said. I didn't go into any detailed explanations. I got out of bed, went into our room and returned with the damaged record cover which we had hidden in my cupboard. Look, I told her. She held the jacket under the light and looked at it silently. How did you find out? She asked. It was by accident and sheer luck, I said. I think he's done something awful and he's hiding in that room in Shankar house and now he's broken poor Seven's flute. Why did he do that, Mama? Please tell me. Mama didn't answer. She was still looking at Remembranta greater than 97. The record jacket and seemed to be in thought. Then she put the cover down on her bed and held me close. I'm sorry, baby, she said. I honestly don't know why. In any case, we haven't heard his side of the story, have we? Why don't we wait a while and maybe things will sort themselves out? Perhaps he'll apologize, perhaps he'll explain. Who wants his explanations? I said indignantly. 7 says he doesn't ever want to see him again. All right, I'll see what I can find out while you're away in Delhi for your holidays, she suggested. I nodded. Mama held me close. Now go to sleep and think about all the wonderful things you'll be doing in Delhi with your cousins. I must have fallen asleep as she softly hummed a comforting lullaby. Daddy, Mom. Was just as well that we left for Delhi soon thereafter to spend our winter holiday with Uncle Ajit and his family. I knew that being away from Bombay would help heal Seven's wounds. It was a big thrill to travel by ourselves with the air hostess keeping an eye on us during the flight. Mama didn't come with us as she had some urgent work at the office. We were naturally going to miss her, but we knew we'd have a wonderful time with our cousins. Uncle Ajit, his wife, Aunt Usha, and our cousins, Amit, who's the same age as Nishad, Shivani, who is a year older than I, and Satish, who's 3 years older, came to receive us at the airport. We drove down to Friends Colony, to their spacious house with its beautiful garden, which Uncle Ajit had recently rented. Bruh. It was cold, but we loved the weather since Bombay doesn't ever experience a real winter. For the first 2 days, we were taken to see the sights of Delhi. It's a fascinating city, and when I heard Pitan and all the stories about the people who built and lived in the city, I almost began to like the hateful subject, history, in case you've forgotten. On our 3rd afternoon in Delhi, something strange happened. We were all playing in the garden with a frisbee when it went sailing across the fence into the neighbor's garden. Since I was closest to the main gate of the house, I offered to go and retrieve it. I opened our gate, closed it behind me, and walked to the next house. As I peeped through the gate to see if I could get anyone's attention to let me in, I glanced at the shiny brass nameplate fixed on the gate post. My heart missed a beat. I couldn't believe my eyes. I closed them, rubbed them, and looked again. I wasn't mistaken. Ravindranath Sharma, it said, and below that a painted sign that read, "Beware of dog and boat." Could it be the same person? I suddenly recalled that Mr. Nath lived in Delhi. This could very well be his house. Was I dreaming? I wondered. I noticed an elderly lady watering the lawns of the bungalow. She was dressed in a fawn salwar kameez with a bright red shawl draped around her shoulders. "Excuse me, Mrs. Sharma," I called out, "may I come and get our frisbee? I'm from next door." The lady came to the gate, opened it, and asked me in. "Not Mrs. Sharma," she said, "I'm Nandini Roy. Now, where's your frisbee disappeared to?" "I found it under a mango tree and threw it over the hedge to my cousins." "Be back soon," I told them. I looked around me, the garden was a riot of colors. It was full of trees of many varieties: mangoes, bananas, neem, oranges. There were neat flower beds of cannas, chrysanthemums and cosmos, roses and dahlias, phlox and pansies, geraniums, nasturtiums, and ever so many others. "Am I in heaven?" I asked. She was smiling. "I love plants and trees and flowers," I told her, "and yours is one of the most beautiful gardens I've seen in my life." "Thank you, my dear," she said. "So we share a common love, do we? Gardening is my main occupation in life." The excitement of the loveliness around me made me forget Mr. Nath as well as my manners. I introduced myself and explained that I was visiting my cousins next door. She resumed watering the lawn with the hosepipe, which she pressed at the end with her thumb to let a lawn spray arch itself over the grass. "Why are you using a hose when you've already got a sprinkler on the lawn?" I couldn't help but ask. She smiled at me. "I'm making rainbows," she said. "When the water catches the sun's rays, it acts like a prism. You have to do it just right. Watch." She pointed to the house. Sure enough, I could see the 7 colors of the Om 101. Rainbow reflected on a patch of the white walls. "That's terrific," I told her. "You must be the rainbow fairy." She smiled. "Could I please come and see your garden tomorrow?" "Do come," she said. "Come as soon as you're ready in the morning." I had an early breakfast the next day, put on my wind cheater, and went next door. I told Aunt Usha that I was going to visit their very nice neighbor. I didn't mention either the lady or the nameplate to Seven. I didn't want to remind him of the unhappy incident in Bombay. The rainbow fairy was sitting on the lawn reading the newspapers. She had such a lovely, happy face, round, with pink cheeks, large, almond-shaped glowing eyes, long, dark hair with a sprinkle of grey tied in a loose bun. She looked up and smiled. "Come and have some pomelo from the garden." She offered me a plate and the bowl of freshly peeled fruit. "Thank you, Ms. Roy," I said, and helped myself to the juicy pink wedges. "Should I call you auntie? Would you prefer that?" "I don't particularly like that word auntie," she said. "How about calling me Dadima? My grandchildren in the United States have changed that to Daddy Mom, American style. Their mother is American and they've always lived in that country." 102. YAAAT Way Oz. Y. ASA Tan MTF. Yes MSSN. 103. Daddy Mom. What a fabulous clever name, I said. "May I call you Daddy Mom, then?" She reached out for my hand, took it in her own, smiled and nodded. "Certainly," she said. I finished eating the fruit and she offered to show me round the garden. It was enchanting. "My grandfather, Abba, would love your garden," I told her. "He loves plants dearly, just as much as I do." "Oh, look at your roses," I remarked as we came to the bed planted with multicolored rose bushes. "They're as large as cabbages. Is this some special giant variety?" She laughed. "No, they're the kind grown in most gardens," she told me. Perhaps they flourish just to please me. I speak to all my plants, just as if they were my own babies. I love them all and I believe they respond to that loving care. I could appreciate that feeling. I then had the pleasure of meeting Coco the beagle and Bibi the black she-goat, who were tied on a leash to a post near the garage. They were playing happily together in the early morning sunshine. Their friends, a dog and a goat. I can't believe it, I said. Are they yours? My grandsons, actually, she said, but I look after Thane now. But your grandchildren are in America, you just told me. Why don't they keep their pets with them? 104. Coco and Bibi are my daughter's son's pets, she said. Where were they? On holiday, perhaps, I thought. I spent some time with the friendly dog and goat and felt amused that the sign on the gate asked visitors to beware of such mild-tempered animals. Back in the garden, I again admired Daddy Mom's gorgeous chrysanthemums which she was planning to enter in the flower show. Visiting this delightful lady after breakfast became a routine over the next few days. We spent most of our time together in the garden, watering or pruning the plants or playing with Bibi and Coco, who soon became dear friends. Nishad and my cousins were quite happy to let me go off by myself to Daddy Mom's. None of them were especially fascinated by plants. Our holiday was due to end in a few days. Although we're Hindus, we celebrate all the festivals we like and we had a wonderful Christmas at Uncle Ajit's with a real tree, lots of presents and turkey for lunch. Mama called us on the phone every other day. She said she missed us terribly, but somehow she sounded happy. One fine morning I found Daddy Mom near the garage with a carpenter. He was replacing the wooden door which had been damaged by white ants. I wish he'd come back to take care of all these problems in his house like he usually did, said my new friend, to no one in particular. I've managed fairly 105. Well, for almost 2 years, but now I find it a bit difficult. There are far too many things to take care of. She looked at me and I heard her sigh. Who are you talking about? I asked. Dear Ravindranath Sharma, she said, shaking her head from side to side. Is that the famous flute waller? I asked anxiously, holding my breath. She nodded. I let out a long breath in sheer relief. So it was his house. Is he your landlord or something? Daddy Mom laughed. Well, he does own this house, so I suppose you could call him the landlord. Poor you, I said. I do feel sorry for you having such a wicked, heartless monster as a landlord. He's awful, isn't he? Nasty to my brother, inconsiderate to you. She stood rooted to the spot, looking dumbfounded. What had I said? What if he was a relative of Fred? How could I have been foolish enough to let that remark slip out? Have you met him? She asked quietly. Much as I wanted to deny it, I simply couldn't fit to such a nice lady. I looked down and nodded. She held my hand and led me towards the chairs on the front lawn. Come, let's sit down, she said gently. Now, tell me about him. 106. I began right at the beginning when we first heard the monster shout. As I started to speak, it was almost as though some invisible floodgates had been opened. It was such a relief to tell someone about it all. I had kept everything bottled up inside me for much too long. I told her about Nishad and Mama and Govinda and the clinic and about Papa's death. It took a while to tell her the whole story, but I was nearing the end. I related the incident of Mr. Nath slapping Seven and breaking his flute. So you see, Daddy Mom, he is wicked. Just when we had become so fond of him and thought of him as a friend, he showed his true colors. The anger and hurt must have shown in my voice. I found myself talking quite loudly. But what was this I saw? Daddy Mom was weeping. I got up from the chair, sat by her feet on the grass and rested my head on her lap. I'm sorry, I said. Did I say something wrong? She shook her head in denial as she fondled my hair. A while later, she wiped her tears on the end of her emerald green shawl, held my hand and made me stand. Come, dear Maya, let's go inside, she told me. A sorrowful tale was seeing the inside of the house for the first time. We entered a hallway lined with potted plants and furnished with a beautiful old chest and mirror. Daddy Mom opened a door and led me into what was apparently the living room, filled with the fragrance of fresh jasmine. The room was furnished simply with low divans, colorful rugs, and plenty of cushions. Daddy Mom asked me to sit and went out through another door. I looked around me. There were dozens of framed photographs on the mantelpiece and pleasing paintings on the wall. I went to the fireplace and looked at the photographs. One in particular caught my eye. There was Mr. Nath with his arms around a very beautiful lady and two young boys. Who were they? I heard a voice behind me. That's Uma, my daughter, Ravi, my son-in-law and their sons, Rahul and Sanjay, she said. I spun around. Do you mean Mr. Nath's your son-in-law? 108. She nodded. I was stunned as well as ashamed. I had said so many nasty things about him. Would she ever forgive me? Where are your daughter and grandsons then? I asked. She silently held a paper before me. I took it from her hands. It was a newspaper clipping. The photograph I had been looking at had been reproduced below the caption, Famous Musician Bereaved. I read on. The renowned musician Rabindranath Sharma had a miraculous escape late yesterday evening. Mr. Sharma was returning with his family after a flute recital at the India International Centre. Sharma's car was rammed from behind by a speeding truck. The car overturned and caught fire. Sharma's wife, Uma, 31, and their two sons, Rahul, 7, and Sanjay, 9, who were in the back seat, died instantly. The driver, Muhammad Abdul, succumbed to his injuries later in hospital. Mr. Sharma, who was in the front seat, was thrown out of the car on impact. He has suffered multiple fractures and first-degree burns on the back and face. He is in intensive care and his condition is critical. The truck driver, Mansukh Kumar, has been arrested for drunken driving. I was sobbing and so was Daddy Mom. She held me close and we comforted each other in silence. We sat on one of the low divans and she poured me a glass of water. A sorrowful tale 109. Such a terrible, sad happening, I said. Why is he in Bombay? I asked. I can only guess, said Daddy Mom. He was in hospital for quite a while after the accident. He just didn't have the will to live when he learned that Uma and his sons had died. I prayed to all the gods I know to get him well again. I love him deeply, as much as I love my own son, you know. It was tragic enough to lose my daughter and grandson so suddenly, and I couldn't bear the idea of losing Ravi too. And then what happened? Ali took him away to Pune to recuperate. Ali Khan is one of Ravi's dearest friends. He's a renowned tabla player, but you already know that. He stayed there for a while, but the visitors and their words of sympathy upset him. Then one fine day, he borrowed some money from Ali and took off on his own. All I know is that he wandered around the country, staying in villages where he wouldn't be recognized. He'd drop me a line occasionally just to let me know he was all right. He fell ill again when he was in Banaras. Mercifully, he wrote to Ali, who went there personally and took him back to Pune. About a year ago, Ali found him a room in Bombay. Ravi felt that he could live there without being recognized. He didn't want to see anyone, talk to anyone, communicate with anyone, but Ali has been visiting him regularly each weekend. He gives him 110. Money to live, though God knows he's got plenty here. Ali keeps me informed about his health. He's quite thin and does fall ill often. My mother treats him at Shankar House when he's unwell, I told Daddy Mom. My heart goes out to him and I've often felt like picking up my bags and going to Bombay. I don't write to him and don't expect letters from him either. I respect his privacy and won't interfere until he wants me in his life again. Daddy Mom, there are so many questions bothering me, I said. I do understand your love for him, but how does it help you or Mr. Sharma to live all by yourself in Delhi? Why haven't you gone to America to your son and his family? That's what my son and daughter-in-law wanted me to do after the accident, she said. After all, I'm a widow, I have no ties here in Delhi, but I told them that my other son needed me, not only to look after his home in his absence and to actually be here whenever he felt like returning. I'll be here waiting for him when he decides to come back, and I know he will, one day, when he accepts his loss. Why does the flute upset him so, Daddy Mom? Again, I can only guess, little one, she said. You see, Oma and the boys were his whole world. He loved them beyond imagination and he couldn't understand how they could suddenly disappear from a Sotail 111. His life. One moment they were there, the next they were all gone. Somehow he feels responsible for their death, this is what he kept saying over and over again at the hospital. He blames his music, his flute recital that evening, and if he hadn't, he played that extra piece of music as an encore, they'd still be alive. Is that why he got so angry and upset each time he heard Nishad flute, Daddy Mum? She nodded. But wasn't it cruel of him to slap my brother and break his flute? Yes, it was, Maya, but I don't think he knew what he was doing. I don't expect you and Nishad to understand that. I can tell you though, that he's a very sensitive man, very kind-hearted and sincere. She went on to recall some of the many happy moments with the family. I think we'll have to tell Seven about all this, Daddy Mom, I remarked. His heart's broken and it's only fair that we tell him all about his friend, Mr. Nath. Bring him over tomorrow morning and we'll talk, she said. How was I going to tell Nishad why he had to meet Daddy Mom? I was restless and troubled all day. I hardly slept that night. Early next morning, I woke him up and took him into the garden. I didn't want our cousins to hear. Seven, I said, I have something very, very serious to discuss with you. He grinned. What is it, Grandma? It's about Mr. Nath, I announced. I don't want to talk about him, Nishad remarked. Don't spoil my holiday. We've both been mistaken about him, Seven. There are many things we don't understand, but Daddy Mom will explain. Who's that? Seven asked, full of curiosity. The lady next door, she's his mother-in-law, I told him. What? What are you talking about? Nishad looked shocked. I explained matters as gently as I could, but left out the sad part about the accident. Daddy Mom will tell you the rest, I said. We went to the house next door. I left Seven with Daddy Mom in the garden and told her I had to get back home. She must have wondered why I wasn't staying. I really couldn't bear to hear the whole story again, it was too tragic. I don't know what she said or how she explained everything to my brother. He came back after an hour with red, tearful eyes. It's very sad, Maya, he said. I think I understand now why he broke my flute. Do you think he'll ever forget the sorrow in his life? We lost Papa, but Mr. A. Sotail 113. Nath lost everyone he loved. Seven burst out crying again. For the remaining 4 days of our stay in Delhi, Nishad came to see Daddy Mom with me each morning. She talked a lot about her grandsons and Nishad made friends with Bibi and Coco. Those few days were filled with fun and picnics and excursions. On New Year's Eve, we went with our cousins to a most enjoyable party at the house of one of their friends. On the first day of the new year, both of us went to Daddy Mom's and bid her goodbye. We asked her to come and visit us both. You will see me soon, she told us. Mama was at the airport to receive us that evening. By the time we reached home after the long taxi ride, it had become dark. Govinda hugged us as we entered our home and told us he'd missed us very much. As we put our bags in our room, we heard the doorbell ringing. Mama called us from the study. We went together into our favorite room. There was someone with Mama, his back to us. Suddenly, he turned around. We couldn't believe our eyes. It was Mr. Nath. He walked up to where we were standing near the door, bent down and held us close to him. Then he took a hand in each of his own and walked us to the long sofa. We sat down, too surprised to speak. I must apologize to you, Nishad, he said, for my extremely unforgivable behavior. Can you forgive me? 114. Nishad nodded. The man looked at me, I nodded too. He picked up something from the table and handed it to Seven. It was a beautiful new, professional flute. When would you like to begin your lessons, son? He asked. Happy endings. Why are no tragedies or shocks at the end of my story? One had mentioned at the beginning that it ends happily, and it certainly does. Let me explain. Just after we left for Delhi for the winter holidays, Mr. Ali Khan visited his friend Mr. Nath at Shankar House. He showed him Nishad's letter even though he had been asked not to. They went to see Mama at our church gate flat to talk about what had happened. By that time, of course, thanks to my midnight confessions, Mama knew Mr. Nath's true identity. Between the three of them, they unraveled all the events and mysteries. I'm sure Daddy Mom too had a lot to do with what happened afterwards. One know that she wrote long letters to Mr. Nath as well as to Mama after I had told her the whole story. Whilst we were in Delhi, something wonderful happened. Mama and Ravindranath Sharma began 116. Meeting each other almost every day, and guess what? They fell in love. No wonder she had sounded so happy on the phone whenever she called us in Delhi. To cut a very long short, our wonderful, loving Mr. Nath, the monster crook robber, is our daddy now, and we have a beautiful baby sister named Saloni. For those of my readers who like to know details, I'll recount the sequence of events as they happened. After our return, Mr. Nath came over often to our flat, not only to teach Seven the flute, but also to spend some time in our company. Gradually, I found that I had been so wrong about him, Daddy Mom and Seven so right. He was indeed affectionate and kind-hearted, and day by day we came to love him very much. 6 months after our return from Delhi, Mr. Nath and Mama had a quiet wedding ceremony at Aber and Gigi's home. Daddy Mom came specially from Delhi for the occasion. We moved to Delhi to Daddy's beautiful home soon afterwards. We like our school here and have made many new friends, and of course, we have Bibi and Coco. Mama runs a medical clinic in the outhouse in the garden. Naturally, Govinda came with us, though he's too old to do much work now. Although he can't stand the cold Delhi winters, he cocoons himself in a blanket and sits out in the sun all day during the cool season. Gigi and Ava visit us whenever they can and spend their time equally between our home and my uncle's end in 117. Next door. Daddy Mom went to America to stay with her son and his family, but thankfully she came back within 3 months and she now lives with us. We all love her dearly. She and look after the garden together, it's wonderful. Daddy performs at public concerts again and is busy with recordings and music seminars. Nishad practices the flute every day with Daddy and has become quite proficient now. Saloni gurgles happily in her crib whilst they play. Who knows, she might become singer when she grows up. Or play the sitar, perhaps. The mantelpiece above the fireplace in our living room is filled with framed photographs of all of us, Papa, Daddy's wife, Rahul and Sanjay. We often talk about all of them and we do feel sad when we think of them, but we are grateful to be so happy again. It's truly a miracle.